Evening, everybody. How's everyone doing? It's Hateful Tate. I'm gonna be doing this rodeo alone. We got quite a few number of topics we're going to be discussing and talking about tonight. One of which is going to be Lily Pete's video on Star Wars. She's going to give her constructive and well thought out ideas about the state of Star Wars and how it has gone up and down over the years, and her recommendations on what she would think would make it better. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to be reading on an article about a Swedish scientist named Magnus Schuludin, who said that cannibalism helps with climate change. And then lastly, we're going to be looking through the Kiwi Farms thread of an alleged pedophile named Psyguy. So I guess we'll begin with Pete's video. If you guys have any thoughts or questions in the chat, feel free to let me know as we continue forward. So let me open this up, and now we can begin. I'm going to be skipping around in some parts because Pete likes to kind of go off on these ridiculous, pointless tangents. But anyways, let's begin.
I had hoped we'd get to decide when and where to fight Arkan. But you're ready for this.
Wish me luck.
Luck has nothing to do with it. Arkan may have bested you on Asylum, but Valkorian's training changed you.
I've never played SWTOR. I have no idea what the fuck is going on right now or who the fuck any of these people are. But Pete sure loves this shit. I just don't like MMOs. I'm not really a big MMO fan myself, despite the fact that I like Star Wars. But there's a lot of other titles that I like that I still won't play MMOs for. But anyways, regardless, let's continue on.
Powerful. More powerful than...
Lana, you're missing the point.
I'm what?
I'm gay
Oh.
for you, bitch.
I see.
When you're done...
Kill me now.
And why I think it needs less pontificating on its own place in the pop culture lexicon and more Jedi ladies kissing Sith ladies. Fuck you, this is what we're doing. This...
You hear that, guys? I don't know if any of you guys are big on any kind of, fantasy genre. But, people have differing preferences for certain kinds of things when it comes to, those kinds of genres. And lore is a big thing. It's basically a writer's tactic for people to argue about the interpretations of what is said and what is, done. And they'll just argue about it endless. This is what generates discussion. This is what encourages people to do research, because these writers will actually pull parallels from real life, whether it be religion or culture, stuff like that, things to help us identify in the real worlds and learn about it and discuss it through the lore and the culture and lifestyles of these races in fantasy genre. And Pete's preference is, I want more gay lesbians kissing. Alright.
This video has spoilers for Rise of Skywalker, but let's be honest, it's not like you actually care. You guys know I love Star Wars. I've loved Star Wars ever since I saw The Phantom Menace as a little kid. Star Wars is right up there with Warcraft and Kingdom Hearts on the list of things that have been a major part of my formative years. That having been said, I find myself getting really disappointed with Star Wars in recent years. I used to latch on everything having to do with the property, but these days I tend to restrict myself to only the Old Republic.
I do love the Old Republic. They were a good role-play game. First one by BioWare, who would later on make Mass Effect, and then you have Obsidian, who makes fantastic, spin-off games, and come from fucking Black Isle Studios that gave us shit like Baldur's Gate and the Fallout series. But anyways, yeah, I've been disappointed with Star Wars as well. It's taken quite a bit of a disappointing turn. in terms of its general quality. But aside from that, you know, I basically, for once in my life, I'm agreeing with something that Pete has to say.
Some people find that weird because there's such a wide breadth of material. I mean, the Clone Wars is being revived, new series, new movies, look at all of it. And I agree, there's a lot of stuff there, but very little of it is actually interesting. The Clone Wars revival looks promising, unless Disney decides to make it more like the new movie.
Again, you know, Pete is going to continuously do the shit that Pete likes to do, and that's say and do things that really has no ground or meaning to it, or at least at the very least not explaining her position properly as to why these things are the way they are. I mean, I think the Mandalorian series is a pretty fucking interesting series. When I first starting it, it got a bit calmed down. You know, it doesn't have the best writing, but it was a far more fascinating beast than any of the sequel trilogy movies so far. And mostly just I'm a Mandalorian fanatic. I love it when it's not always about the Jedi and the Sith. Like everyone has a role in the grander story of things. It happens to be the Jedi and the Sith that are the main players, because life culminates around the Force, and these two factions are the ones that can manipulate the fucking Force. But anyways, let's continue on.
Movies, which are patient zero for the problem Star Wars has been having lately. It's a lot of deep lore, fandom, metagame nonsense, actively rewriting things that made sense to replace it with some more weird magic crap, and a cast of characters that can be summed up as a character from the old movies, but with a single quirk at it.
I guess so. I mean, Anakin wasn't really the best well-written character in Star Wars history. Hi, Rouge. But he actually had a level of depth. He had stakes. He has flaws. He has fucking, an arc in his life, a story. Things he cares about. Obviously, shit that Rey cares about. There's things that Rey cares about, but, ultimately in the grand scheme of things, it's like Anakin wanted to save his mom from dying because he becomes a Jedi, and Jedi are supposed to be great, powerful warriors, noble warriors who do good things, high moral standing things throughout the galaxy. And Rey has her fucking connection with Kylo, but in the new movie he's basically like, I can turn it on and off whenever I want, instead of it's set up in The Last Jedi that their connection was something that was naturally forming between them, and then Snoke was like, lol, no, I fucking made the connection between you two so I could find out where Luke is, basically. Anakin has a tragic flaw, and that flaw is that he is greatly connected to the Force because he was conceived by the Force, and he has terrible nightmares about the people he cares about dying, and he wants to stop that from happening because less death in the galaxy is a good thing in a very general and sort of on the surface kind of thing. Like I said before, the prequels don't really have a lot of depth. They have their good moments. I'll definitely say Revenge of the Sith had some pretty good moments in terms of like the theater scene, in terms of contrast, referring more to the I am your father moment, which we'll get to in a little bit in this video. Obi-Wan has depth. Some examples being, he goes from a wide-eyed, most of the time obeying Padawan to his master Qui-Gon before his master gets brutally murdered by Maul, and then he, who is basically, an under-equipped, under-tutelaged Jedi master, has to train essentially the chosen one. It's a perfect recipe for disaster. Padme, again, not a lot of depth and interest of a character, but she had an arc and she had things that she cared about, and there were reasonings to believe why she would do the things that she does in these movies. She goes from the Queen of Naboo to its senator, you know, basically to, you know, it gets to the point in Revenge of the Sith where, you know, the Republic that she's spending the past several years trying to save and maintain becomes a fucking empire. It's gone now. She has nothing left except Anakin, who essentially at that point in the film has become a murderous, deranged psychopath who is drowned in the dark side. And because he's so attuned to the Force, he's basically being overwhelmed by the dark side, so he's not thinking clearly. He doesn't have his you know, his priorities and his cognition fully in stock. And, you know, she wants him to run away with him. And he's like, no, we don't have to run away anymore because I'm super powerful and I can just kill the Emperor. And Padme is obviously upset about that because now she's lost everything that she cared about by the time, like, you know, Anakin turns on her and attempts to kill her. And, you know, at the end of her journey, she still believes that there's good in Anakin. And by the time of the Return of the Jedi, turns out she's true. So it's not... The point I'm saying here is that the sequel trilogy is a wretch of a mess because, you know, he contemplated murdering his nephew who literally did nothing wrong when, like, 2 movies ago he went through a incredible amount of length to save the second most evil person in the galaxy. It's like, I get it. Luke is a human being. He's a flawed person. I get that people can relapse, but it's like Luke is he's seen as a very sacred character among pop culture, and even among fantasy. And, you know, I understand why fans feel that they were disrespected with The Last Jedi and how he died and how things played out and how people didn't really get the answers that they wanted by the end of The Last Jedi. And then Rise of Skywalker was just JJ's attempt at, like, throwing the middle finger at Rian Johnson and trying to make as many rectifications to this basically empty mystery box that Ryan ends up taking a shit at the end of it. But, you know, that's pretty much that. The point is the sequel trilogy didn't really have a concise plan to it, while the prequel trilogy, despite its flaws, there was a plan behind it. There was an end goal by George Lucas.
Nowhere is this more apparent than the main character, Rey. Her entire character can easily be summed up as, what if Anakin Skywalker was a girl and also a big dork?
That's a pretty shallow take on his character. I mean, yeah, Rey has visions about the present, and sometimes she's not really plagued or haunted by it. Like I said before, the tragedy of Anakin's character is that he's powerless to stop the people he cares about from dying. And what does Rey care about? Well, Rey cares about finding her parents and finding someone to belong with, except the problem is that the people that she tries to identify with end up dying for retarded reasons. Retarded or contrived reasons. But, you know, anyways, the point is, Rey, saying Rey is the gender bent equivalent of Anakin Skywalker is very shallow and really has no credence behind it. I'm just gonna skip past this. She's just basically bypassing the compressor, lol.
You big dork.
Don't look so pleased with yourself.
Despite my dismissive tone, Rey is probably the most refreshing, interesting take on a common Star Wars archetype I've seen in years. She easily stands...
What is her archetype, Pete? Like, I don't know what Rey's character is, if I'm gonna be honest. Like, she's an enigma wrapped into a piece of cardboard. It's hard, or no, it's sandpaper. It's fucking sandpaper. It's hard, it's rough, and it's coarse and shit. It's like, what am I supposed to be invested in? Like, I don't know who the fucking middle character is because, like I said before, I've never played the Old Republic MMO game. I've played Knights of the Old Republic 2. Kreia is by far one of the most interesting characters because she is essentially the game's creator's mouthpiece for everything he hates about the Force as a concept. Which again, so many fucking tabs open. Anyways, let's carry on.
Stands alongside Kreia and Lana Beniko as one of the best characters ever brought into the franchise, but unlike those two, she's in the main series, which means there's the constant threat of Darth Maul syndrome hanging over her fucking head for the next decade.
They did it to Ahsoka, they'll do it to you.
But Ahsoka wasn't in the main movies. Darth Maul was in the main movies. I don't understand how that makes sense. Like, you're worried that a character is going to become throwaway? Like, I don't understand. Like, I don't think you understand how much people liked it that the Clone Wars was bringing back Darth Maul. And the way, like I said before, this is the key here is execution. The execution of how that story and how it was set up in stories prior to it was well done. The logic of what happened beforehand makes sense. When Ahsoka first came on in the Clone Wars movie, everyone fucking hated her. Now we're like 5, 6, 7 years in after that, and people love her character. Or actually, it's more like 12 years in at this point. We're 12 years in and people fucking love her character. In fact, I'd say like the highest moments in Rebels is Twilight of the Apprentice, when Ahsoka actually meets up with Vader, who, from anyone who's a Star Wars fan knows that she was her master when he was still a Jedi, because Ahsoka left the Jedi Temple during the Clone Wars and wasn't around for Revenge of the Sith. But yeah, I don't see why a character like Ahsoka is a bad thing, or a character becoming like Ahsoka is a bad thing. I don't really think that her character was treated poorly. I think the logic as to how and why they brought back her character, when we presumed that she died like a fucking badass to Vader, was fixed, and it was fucking time travel. So we'll get into we'll continue on now.
What I love about Rey is that she's unlike most other protagonists. She's not the chosen one, there isn't a big mystery behind her origins, there wasn't some special link to the previous...
I'm going to quote something right here that Adam Driver, no, not Adam Driver, the actor who plays Anakin said to Rey in the fucking film, and it's bring balance to the Force like I did, which she fucking didn't. No, he fucking didn't, because the chosen one is supposed to bring balance to the Force, and we're presumed to believe that by Anakin murdering or wiping out the Jedi before, after, and during the Clone Wars, it would even out the light side, and then killing Palpatine would essentially even out the dark side, and him dying would basically bring that concept of balance full circle. Bringing Palpatine back kind of ruins that arc. It doesn't take away the sacrifice he made in the first film. I guess you could say it's more along the lines of Vader dies so that his son may live another day. Unfortunately, that other day ends with a bombastic failure and a total ruin of Luke's character. It's a whole mess, the whole 9 yards. I've heard stories about how JJ and Lucas actually met up together, and they had plans for this final film, and it was going to involve someone totally different. It wasn't going to be Palpatine, and the exec said no. I don't think Pete understands how the concept of fate and destiny works in the universe of Star Wars. The Force connects to all living things. It has an influence on all living things. It's subtle suggestions, and I know there was an argument that I had with Riley on Limbo, and he asked me, isn't it a bit far-fetched that no one really believes in the Force or about the Force 20 years after the destruction of the Jedi? And it was like, well, Han Solo was mostly saying that he doesn't believe in predestination, because he's basically saying that the Force, it is believed by the Jedi that the Force has a plan and a purpose for everyone in the galaxy. That's basically the logic of it. I don't think that line is supposed to denounce the existence or the prevalence of that the Jedi once had before the rise of the Empire. It's just basically like, I wouldn't say there's no free will or no agency, but there are definitely higher powers and higher forces at work to basically bring balance to a never-ending cycle of death, destruction in the galaxy. That's kind of the point that the creator of KOTOR 2, I can't believe I forgot his name. He's the fucking guy that made fucking Fallout. Here, I'll look him up. But, essentially it's that, the Force is using everybody in a vain means to attain balance. And, that's basically it. Creator of KOTOR 2. Chris Avalon. Oh my god, Chris Avalon, please forgive me for forgetting your name. It's just been a long fucking day. But yeah, anyways, let's continue.
Characters, she's just a Force-sensitive person who happened to get caught up in the war by circumstance. Of course,
again, the whole concept of circumstance and coincidences in the Star Wars universe is that, in a narrative perspective, the Force is guiding everyone, whether they're aware of it or not. Like, Jedi who are Force sensitive are aware of the presence of the Force, and they can interact with it, and, in the leniency of the dark side, manipulate it to an unnatural means. The people who are not Force sensitive are not aware of this occurrence in the galaxy, more so in the sense that they can feel its presence and feel its influence. But yeah, continue.
People don't fucking like that because for some reason everyone thought they were gonna do the stupid "I am your father" thing again.
I don't think that's what people were mad about, that Rey was the chosen one. In fact, I believe that's what pissed people off, is that, like I said before, bringing Palpatine back sort of took away Anakin's chosen one status and destroyed the relevancy of his arc and character. But like I said, again, to be fair, I don't really think that ruins his sacrifice to save his son and turn over to the light before he dies, and pass on and become one with the Force. It's more along the means that she's just a boring blank slate that really doesn't have interesting, fascinating motivations or backstory. And what the hook, I guess you could say, for Luke's character is that, in a sense, he is us. He is the person seeking for more, someone who's living with their parents and basically, being tied down by the rules and restrictions, and wants to go out and make something for themselves. And if I remember correctly from A New Hope, the line sort of suggests that Luke isn't really morally against signing up with the Imperial Academy. He just wants to become a pilot and go on space adventures. It's only until his aunt and uncle and the rest of his family there are killed by the stormtroopers that were looking for the droids, C-3PO and R2-D2, that he's like, fuck the Empire, fuck this planet, I'm never coming back here, I'm gonna become a Jedi. That's basically it. It's very subjective, but it's like, I don't really have anything in terms of hindsight that makes Rey an interesting character. So yeah.
Again, because why? Real talk, why was it just assumed they do that shit again? Is it because protagonist with some stupid backstory twist was in both Empire Strikes Back and Knights of the Old
Well, because the nature of Star Wars is very cyclical. It's poetry. It sort of it rhymes.
Republic? Because it wasn't in most other Star Wars properties. Are Star Wars...
I'm gonna have to go back real quick.
Stupid backstory twist was in both Empire Strikes Back and Knights of the Old Republic?
These fucking movies are nonsensical, logical garbage with uninteresting characters. There are very high stakes, but those stakes don't resonate because people don't give a shit about the characters. It's pretty much simple as that.
Capable of thinking outside deep lore nonsense?
I mean, I don't really see why having a twist is a bad thing, or it's a fucking trope of Star Wars. Like, I know each trilogy has its twists, although I'd say that the prequel trilogy was a bit more subtle about it, because like I said before, the theater scene between Anakin and Palpatine, and he's telling him the story of Darth Plagueis, who can save people from death and create life by manipulating the midichlorians, is basically a more subtle way of saying, hey, Anakin, I'm the Sith Lord who was trained by this guy, and me and him helped make you, essentially. So yes, you can consider that the twist of the story. I mean, you could also say that fucking Order 66 was a twist, although you could say it's sort of out of nowhere. But Attack of the Clones, despite its many faults, it goes out of its way explaining how the clones operate. They're basically cloned organisms that are programmed to obey commands, and the Jedi and the Republic didn't know that this army existed, and we find out that this army was created by some guy named Tyrannus, and then we find out that Tyrannus is Count Dooku, who was the apprentice of Darth Sidious, and that they're Sith. Basically, the Sith created the clone army, and the mystery was, why did the Sith create an army to help the Jedi fight against the Separatists? And it's to gain, so the clones would gain the trust of the Jedi. I don't know exactly if they were okay with that in some cases, or in most cases, but again, it's like, why is that bad? Why is it bad for a franchise to have a mystery and a twist with it? Like, people were hoping the big twist about Rey's parentage would at least explain why she's so powerful in the Force, or so gifted in the Force, although Force sensitivity is a bit of an anomaly, but yet it also at the same time there's to a certain extent a biological mechanism to it, meaning that if you're Force sensitive and you have children, your children will most likely be Force sensitive, because it has something to do with what's in your blood. Although I'd assume in that case, wouldn't that mean Force sensitivity is more mitochondrial in that sense, as in it's something you'd inherit from your mom if it's something to do with your blood? I don't know. Actually, I'm thinking of mitochondrial DNA. Shit. But anyways, there's, like I said before, George Lucas had a plan with the prequel trilogy. It wasn't well executed, but it was still planned out. That's the problem. There's good writing, and then there's bad writing, and then there's writing that isn't well executed. You can have the best stories and ideas ever, but it needs to go through a fine-tooth comb. I know when I watched the documentary of George Lucas creating the Phantom Menace, he is openly upset about how the film turned out, and he literally had his editor had to explain to him, it's like, there are so many things happening that we can't take out some of these scenes because they need to happen, and it's like you've written yourself into a box, and like I agree with what Mr. Plinkett had to say about the film, or that what George Lucas says in that documentary is he's trying to rationalize to himself that it's like it's stylistic. It breaks new grounds, and it's this stylistic piece that may be seen unorthodox to the public at first, but will come to enjoy it as what it is. But unfortunately, that's not the case. The difference between the sequels and the prequels is that it took a lot longer for people to realize that the prequels were bad. I'm pretty sure I'd even say that it wasn't until Mr. Plinkett's review that people started realizing how bad the films were. But anyways, let's carry on.
Dumb question, I know. Hey, so this script was written before Rise of Skywalker came out, and I was not prepared for them to reveal that Rey was actually Palpatine's granddaughter, because for all the old garbage they recycle from the original trilogy and Knights of the Old Republic, I still foolishly believe there was some vestige of creativity in...
I mean, I don't agree that it was a creative decision to make, because it is incredibly difficult to basically go from your parents were nobodies to your parents were nobodies, I'm not lying to you, to I never lied to you about your parents being nobodies. They didn't want to be nobodies, even though I said in the last film that they pretty much like left you on that desolate planet to be sold as drinking money. And that it's like she was a fucking kid, and like the film basically says that her parents were being stalked and chased down by this Sith assassin. It's like, how the fuck are they not nobodies? I don't get it. Again, it's like I don't know how. I mean, like I said before, like, no, I don't think that Rey being a Palpatine was a creative decision, because it wasn't executed well enough through the trilogies. Like I said before, it seemed that the movies were setting up Snoke as the main bad guy, and that Palpatine was gone. All was good with the world. It's just that I wouldn't say that Rise of Skywalker does as much damage as The Last Jedi. I'd say it still does some... It still does damage to the previous canon. Hang on a sec. I'm probably being told that my stream is going to shit. No. It's just Sheldon telling some SJW to eat a dick. Anyways. Where was I? It's... Like I said, it's totally subjective on how you want to see something. Like a writing decision, like where somebody comes from. But and as like I said before, force sensitivity is an anomaly. Like, you may not come from force sensitive parents. The fact that Rey is a nobody doesn't help the fact that fans still wanted an explanation as to why Rey was just able to pick up on force techniques and abilities so easily, without it either being properly communicated or explained to the audience, to, like how he was able to beat Kylo Ren in a lightsaber fight. I know that she has experience with a staff, but a staff is different from using a fucking weapon that is powered by a crystal that is connected to the Force. going from a two-handed to a single-handed weapon, and is going up against an opponent who, one, was trained by Grandmaster fucking Luke Skywalker and Dark Lord of the Sith Snoke. But he's, fans say that, well, he suffered an injury and that hindered his efforts in the fights, which is not an argument that Pete is going to use, which we'll see later. It in fact would actually enhance him more in combat because he's a dark side user, and dark side users channel pain, anger, and hatred into them to make them stronger, essentially. Like their power is derived from emotion.
Lucasfilm's desiccated corpse. So that kind of renders all my opinions about Rey being a refreshing character rather moot, because they just did the same thing they did with everyone else. And
why does that matter? It's like Rey coming from a place of greatness or a place of influence doesn't really, like, if that's the only appeal you have for her character, is that she's a nobody and that she's doing great things despite she comes from no great lineage. Are you forgetting that Anakin Skywalker was literally space Jesus? He was born to a slave woman on Tatooine who had no force sensitivity, just out of nowhere. It's like, sure, he was a result of the Sith whacking the Force out of balance, but you can't sit there and say to me that Rey is super strong and it has something to do with the fact that Rey is the only supposed light side user in the galaxy that we know of, aside from Luke, who by the time we meet Rey has cut himself off from the Force, is fucking Snoke, who has fucking god powers, was able to amass basically the remnants of the Empire into this substantial force that was able to build a planet-sized death machine and amass the forces and resources. The Empire Strikes Back, this Empire still has the resources to pursue the underdog rebels. We were led to believe that the First Order were the underdogs in The Force Awakens, and that them taking out the New Republic was to at least somewhat even the playing field for them. I agree with Pete that these stories need some creativity. In fact, I'd like a story where it's about the bad guys. It's not so much like The Mandalorian, because the Mandalorians are more about an honor-driven warrior culture. It's very amoral. They have to do won't rely on force sensitivity. They rely on armor that is resistant against the Force and can essentially deflect. Years ago, in terms of Legends canon, like, the original Mandalorian species is extinct. Like, what remains of them is their culture and their way of life as a warrior culture. That's all that's left of them. But it's like to say, like, this trilogy, like I said before, I agree with Pete. It wasn't very creative, but I don't really agree that with Pete putting a character like Rey on the same plaque as someone like fucking Kreia, who is a much more well thought out, motivated character, who has a deep-seated backstory, complex motivations, and is morally ambiguous. Like, you first meet her and you assume that she's a force-sensitive Jedi, and then she's like, I'm not a Jedi anymore. And then, I don't know how I was able to do this, but I was able to find out early on in the game that she was actually the leader of the Sith. She trained a Sith conclave on Malachor, and led the Sith triumvirate that basically was in the process of destroying the galaxy and the Republic, and was betrayed and lost her connection to the Force. And she spent the last few years wandering through the galaxy looking for a purpose. And then she met the Exile. You know, there's obviously more to it. It's just the problem is that, you know, Force Awakens plays it safe, and then The Last Jedi tries to subvert and basically like destroy the logic within Star Wars. Like, from an objective perspective, I'll like give a simple example. Like, yeah, why haven't other Starfleets used light speed travel as a means in spaceship warfare? It's a simple answer. It's like, it's a super devastating means to destroy a fleet, and like you could probably just like hook a light speed engine on fucking giant asteroids and not even have to like sacrifice human or even droid lives. But you know, whatever. It's like I'm actually fucking defending Rey for Pete. It's like there was definitely more to and he's just like, go away, get off my fucking island.
And then ended the story with her going on to train a bunch of new Jedi, which means...
Did she? I don't know. I'm assuming that's what the plan is, but she never really. Well, I guess neither did Luke outright say, "I'm going to train a new generation of Jedi," but he was told by Yoda to pass on what he's learned. You know, it's like, what really has Rey learned through her journey? Close your eyes and say the Force, and you'll beat the neo-Nazi wannabe with a lightsaber. Don't think highly of the people that you look up to, because you'll be disappointed, I guess. Blindly believe in the assertions by some divine cosmic force that someone's going to turn good just because you had a feeling about it. Your past is not defined by what you were. Yeah. People can change, I guess. I mean, Rey and Kylo have their little moment where she's dead and he transfers his life essence to her, because that's a thing you can do when you're light-sided. I mean, that would have really fucking helped in a lot of instances, you know. Saved Qui-Gon, saved Padme, you know, saved a whole bunch of fucking people that the Jedi could have saved with this apparent force ability that this movie has. But nah. Again, it seems like a small thing, but it's like, it creates so many plot holes now in these other films. It's like, I don't know how this is good for Star Wars if you're making a lot of other films look bad for this logical inconsistency. It's like you're essentially trading off one film for 6 to 7 other ones look bad as a result because of that. You get what I mean? It's like, I'll use a smaller example, like fucking Han Solo, you know, says that he can lightspeed through the Starkiller base's shields using lightspeed. It's like, okay, why didn't they just do that in Return of the Jedi when they were attacking the second Death Star? It's like the whole point of that plot synopsis was to go to Endor, take down the shield generator, so that the rebels could go and blow up the big bad ship. But I guess not. I guess you could have just light sped through it, saved a whole bunch of lives and time. There probably would have been no need for Luke to go confront his father, although that would have been a lot. Yeah, I guess they could have still done it. They still could have had Luke, you know, be captured by the Empire and be confronted by his father and the Emperor.
His next trilogy, Rey will be the washed-out aging hippie having to contend with the return of Darth Maul.
No, I see what you're doing here, Pete. You're basically saying that Rey is going to become Luke. So, to a basic fan synopsis, you're saying that they're going to betray her character on the first moment's notice, because she contemplates murdering one of her loved ones because the Force told her he or she was going to do something bad in the future. You see what I'm getting here? It's like Luke didn't just become a hippie for no reason. Became a hippie because he basically failed himself and he was ashamed. And I don't really think it helps the fact that he found out that his best friend was murdered by his own son because of his fallibility and sort of his inability to be an effective teacher.
Again, and Ahsoka, and Revan, and then Anakin will hit her in the face with a stick. They also decided to make it so that Rey and Kylo Ren are literal soulmates. And out of all the dumb, stupid ideas that Disney could have possibly done, making Reylo canon was probably the dumbest of them all.
Yeah, that was pretty dumb.
Like, dude, that shit's just fucking gross. If there's one thing Disney managed to do, it was to achieve the title of most cursed and unhealthy attempt at romance in a series that includes a woman being trapped and threatened, quasi-incestuous makeouts, and
Hey. Han can be the good guy. And also they didn't know. Well, I think that line that Leia says in Return of the Jedi was complete bullshit, that she knew the entire time that they were brother and sister. Or she just had a feeling about it. To me, that just seems like total bullshit. That line, I think it's just supposed to. I think it was just an oversight on Lucas's part, where it's like, basically to reveal that she does have this Force connection, and that she had this greater feeling that she knew who Luke was, through the Force. But then it's like, basically telling fans, yeah, I was aware of the fact that I had unironic incestuous relations for you to make, Han jealous.
spouse strangling another. Also, the film is getting accolades.
Well, like I said before, Anakin strangled Padme because he was so sunk deep into the dark side. She was basically saying, let's run away and run from our problems, when he just spent the whole time killing and murdering people, ending a war to end their problems. And then he sees that Obi-Wan's there, and he assumes that Padme brought him there if he wasn't willing to come with her to murder him. Like I said, it wasn't the most well-executed moment, but there was logic behind why Anakin did what he did. He just lost himself in the moment because, like I said, he sunk in the dark side. He was assumed Padme betrayed her, and he's basically being told by his lover that everything he did was a waste of time and energy. There was a culmination and a setup to events to happen in the final acts of the story.
For having the first gay kiss in the franchise, an accolade it doesn't deserve because the Old Republic beat them to.
Oh, shut the fuck up. That thing isn't even canon. Shit isn't even canon. Shut the fuck up.
Always been so blisteringly stupid, because not only is Mary Sue a nebulous concept that can always be adjusted to fit an individual's personal dislikes in any given moment, but Rey is a Force-sensitive person.
Okay. Pete, tell me what Rey's flaws are. Because I can't seem to find any flaws, except for the fact that it's like she did the same thing that Luke did in the flashbacks of The Last Jedi. Is she misinterpreted or was fooled into believing that something that may happen in the future will happen. But it's like what is her flaw? Like, what is her character flaw? Like, you can't say she doesn't know who she is. That's like, okay, that's more of a staple of her character. Like, when I think of a flaw, I think of being prideful, being anxious, indifferent, greed, shit like that. People having sort of not necessarily a tragic flaw, but just a flaw that that they have to work on fixing, but in a relatable sense means that it's still baggage. It's still something that they're going to have to deal with for the rest of the life moving forward. It's just the point of the arc is to learn from it and be aware from it and move on and see if things change. Like I said before, characters can relapse. They can repeat old mistakes. And like I said before, I agree with what Rian Johnson did. I just don't think it was executed properly. In contrast, that Luke sees a vision of Kylo killing people, or him killing the people that he cares about, when at that point he had literally done nothing, and decides to murder him in his sleep. I don't understand how that's that is a flaw. Luke's flaw is that he always looks to the future. I'm not saying that he's an optimist in any certain sort of sense, but he's just someone that doesn't pay attention to what's going on now. He cares about what needs to be done, and sorting out the details later. I appreciate that Ryan noticed that aspect about Luke's character. I don't agree that his greatest asset, or I wouldn't even say it's an asset, it's just a thing that he does, ever seems to be built up that it's his flaw. It's the only time I can see where Luke is tragically making a mistake is that the very idea that his sister being converted to the dark side horrifies him and pisses him off so much that he literally goes all out on his father, and cuts his arm off, or cuts his hand off, and is about to kill him. And it's only because of the Emperor that it pulls him out of that moment and stops him from doing that. And because of his mercy, his father decided to sacrifice his own life to save his son's. It's there are arcs, there are flaws. I can't think of a single character-based flaw that Rey has, aside from the quirk is that she's trying to find some place that she belongs and doesn't know who her parents are.
They're always on a certain level of overpowered to begin with.
Being force sensitive does make you powerful to a certain extent. That doesn't mean that there are people in the galaxy that can combat people like the Jedi. Like I said before, there are characters in the Clone Wars series that have beaten Jedi. There are other force sensitive factions out there, but besides the Sith and the Jedi, and yes, being force sensitive does give you particular gifts over other people, but even among force sensitive and Jedi standards, it's a bit unprecedented, because she's able to pick up on so many things without training. I don't think Rey was born from the Force. We may never know what her midichlorian count is, but I can say for certain that aside from Luke, Anakin was probably one of the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy, because he was the fucking chosen one, born from the Force. Having a high midichlorian count means that you have it's basically saying you are a hunter. Someone with a low midichlorian count has poor conditioned weapons and equipment, and someone with a higher midichlorian count has better weapons and equipment. That's the difference. You still need training and experience in how to use them. What the fuck is Rey's training and experience in this indication? And the fact that she can do things that impresses and wows people, like Han, she seems to know the ship better than he does, and your argument might be she's a scavenger, she knows where to find things. It's yeah, and I mean, the films don't really explain how has such a familiar understanding of a Corellian ship. You know, not all ships have parts built in the same places. And I mean, you know, I had a theory as to why it was, or at least a better recommendation to explain why Rey can do the things that she can do, but there were obviously like costs to it, narratively and personally. The reason why Rey is a Mary Sue is because Kylo was improved. He definitely got 2 wins on her, you know, before they went their separate ways. But that was mostly to say Rey is uncomfortable and distracted about the possible truth of her lineage and the discoveries that she's learning about her past that is, you know, is basically throwing off her mojo, even though, like, in the instances we see her fighting, she is morally compromised. You know, she sees, like, Finn being brutally hurt, and I mean, she takes Luke's lightsaber, and when she does, she is crying. She is upset. You know, she's not thinking clearly when she's fighting. You know, and then when she's like, closes her eyes and says the Force and channels the Force within her, only then does she like fucking beat a guy who's had training from fucking Luke Skywalker and fucking Snoke. She's had no training. She has no experience in using these kinds of weapons or using these kinds of techniques. It's unfair and it's lazy screenwriting that the writer is able to just say, oh, anyone can do this shit. Okay, sure. How about anyone has the potential to do this stuff if they dedicate themselves to hard work and training? I think that's a great moral for children growing up, is that you can't achieve much in life without having to apply yourself, instead of, oh no, this will just come to you naturally, or not even naturally, it'll just come to you. You don't even need to read a book, just fucking don't even read the fucking book, you know? Fuck the books, fuck the studying, fuck the hard work, you know, it's all gonna come to you. Little effort, all the rewards, ladies and gentlemen.
Luke had fucking perfect aim. Anakin had the...
No, he didn't. How did he have perfect aim? Because he shot fucking proton torpedoes into a hole that he said was no bigger than the size of womp rats, that he himself said he had no difficulty shooting. Like I said before, there was an explanation why he was able to make that shot.
The reflexes of a god. Fucking...
Anakin had the reflexes of a god. It's... In The Phantom Menace, it's supposed to explain that the reason why Anakin wasn't fucking killed as compared to, like, the other aliens he was competing with is because his reflexes aren't human. If a human was to compete in a tournament like this that is so fast-paced and dangerous and not possess the reflex skills to react in certain circumstances, he'd probably be fucking dead. It even says in the movie that he's crashed one or a couple of Watto's pod racers in the past. He didn't die, he got hurt, but he was still able to save at least some of it, I think, or it was most or some of it, I don't remember, but you know, his bragging, he probably was exaggerating when he said, I saved most of it, which, yeah, no, Watto did say, yeah, actually, I can't remember what Watto said. Fuck what Watto said. Who gives a shit what Watto had to say? You know, now he's gonna say that Rey is a Mary Sue.
Revan was the single closest thing to a Mary Sue any fictional character.
Outside of playing the games, like, sure, I'll give it in the sense that, like, our player character can understand a lot of alien languages, and the backstory is supposed to be that he's a soldier that served in different places and it was able to pick up on different language, and that's supposed to explain how he's able to translate different alien languages when the actual reason is that Revan, who, spoilers, you play as, but it's been like 17 fucking years since that game came out, so sorry, who you play as but don't know it because you suffer from the amnesia trope and the Jedi basically changed your memories. He used the Force to understand other languages. Again, I don't see that as a Mary Sue move because it makes sense because Jedi are connected through the Force, and I don't find it outside the realm of possibility that they can use that connection to communicate with other races. He helped basically stop a war against the Mandalorians that seemed unbeatable. I believe with the Mandalorian, I forgot his name is. I know, right? Like I love these games and I can't even remember half the fucking names of these people. He says like by the time Revan had got into the Mandalorian wars, they were nearing the core systems, which means that they were close to taking the capital, which was Coruscant. And you know, I definitely say that like yes and no. Like yes, Revan achieved great feats as a warrior, but when you play as him, you know, like the flaws of how you role play as a character of Revan means that his character would potentially and essentially have flaws. Like his duality in his perceptions of the Force. Like tragedy of his character is that he goes full on dark side when you rescue him from the Sith prison, and he builds an army of extermination droids to basically kill all the Sith, which includes soldiers and innocent civilians of the Empire. But it's like, nah, it doesn't matter. I'm killing the enemy to save the many of the galaxy. I'm killing the darkness to preserve the light. That was his rationality. Then he gets killed. Then he uses his hatred to basically come back from the dead, which is something we've seen in a previous KOTOR game. One of the Sith Lords, Darth Soren, I forgot his name, is basically immortal, and he uses his pain and suffering to come back from the brink of death. I don't find it impossible, because the Sith cannot achieve immortality in the sense where you can live through the Force forever. It's more of you have to bend the Force to your will to basically like commit acts of sorcery like essence transference, in some cases fucking time travel. There was a Sith Lord that achieved the concept, I'd say more of a space time travel mechanism, because he opens a portal into a subspace that allows him to travel into the future. But I'd also say he could probably just he's stuck in that dimension until the mechanism or what he asks Vader to build within his castle would allow him to open the gateway and come through. I can't remember. It's been a while since I read that comic. Kreia definitely sucks Revan's dick a lot in this film, or in that game, because Revan is an anomaly, much like us, the player character in the second game, the Exile. And the reason why Revan was such an anomaly was because he often questioned the teachings of the Jedi. He often sought multiple teachers and multiple interpretations of how his teachers see the Force, and at the same time he tries to learn about the secrets of the dark side because he wants a greater understanding of the Force. It's just like what Palpatine says in Revenge of the Sith. If one is to have a greater understanding of things, one needs to take a larger perspective of things, not the narrow, dog-minded view of the Jedi, or dogmatic view of the Jedi, because that's what it is. Like the way of the Jedi in the time of the prequels it's very dogmatic. You're not allowed to have relationships. you're taken in as a child, or probably as a fucking baby, because Anakin was fucking like 7 or 8 years old, and they said he was too old because he had already formed attachments, and that's ultimately, you know, what the creator of KOTOR 2 wanted to go out and do. And to a certain extent, the first Knights of the Old Republic game, it was basically to say, I'd say the biggest thing is that it's okay for you to care about people. It's okay to have relationships, but when you let your personal passions, and in more of the sense of like sexual, personal, not preferences, but if you let those sort of personal, nonsensical things like take over, like that's what you should be working to control against. Like, learn restraint, not docilation and disconnect from your feelings. And that's basically what the antithesis of KOTOR 2 is it's like, what was the faults of the Jedi, because the Jedi are being portrayed in that game as just as culpable as the Sith. And the Jedi argument is basically, well, who's to blame? Is it the students or the teachers that cause so many of their students to fall to the dark side? Again, the flaws of Revan is the flaws and the mistakes that the player character makes. It's how you role play as this character that defines his mistakes or her mistakes.
Character will ever get, because not only is he powerful,
Achilles isn't a Mary Sue. Odysseus isn't a Mary Sue. You know why? Because they all have flaws. They're all powerful, in some cases demigods, but they suffer from flaws, and that costs them the lives of the people that they care about. And in most cases, that flaw is pride. And that, and to a certain extent of interpretation, is Revan's flaw. He has, he prides himself in being one of the first to be a conduit for both the light and the dark side of the Force, and not being subjugated to the weaknesses of either one. He doesn't fully succumb to his emotions. He doesn't fully disconnect himself from his emotions. He just lives and exists as a person who allows himself to live. This is like, I'd say the reason why Revan ends up the way he does by the end of his story is because he's been tortured by the Emperor for 300 years. He's haunted and hates this man so much to the point that he'll bring this guy back dead just to kill him again. He hates this guy. He hates his fucking guts. Is defeated by him and is essentially brainwashed by this guy to kill everything he cares about, i.e. the Republic. He turns his best friend Malik against him to the dark side. Is that sort of thing. He has many character-driven reasons as to why he hates this guy and why he does the things that he does. The reason why he's not, like, he is significant, is because he's, like I said before, he's not tied down to any single dogma, whether it's the Sith or the Jedi. He's his own person who's learned from both sides and become something different.
other characters, including the ever-cynical Kreia, speak about him in reverent tones about how he's really just so cool you got.
Like I said before, the reason why Kreia sucks his dick is because he wasn't as narrow-minded as the rest of the Jedi. And yeah, he did bad things, but how she describes it is Revan did what needed to be done to basically preserve the future of the galaxy. Like, can you imagine what the future of Star Wars would have been had a bunch of mass murdering marauders? Here, I'll give an example. I'll tell you what the Mandalorians would have done. They would have fucking glassed the planets of the Republic, pillaged, raped, and murdered billions of people, had Revan not stopped them. I don't know how many Mandalorians and Jedi died by the end of this, but he took drastic means and measures to basically defeat the Mandalorians because the Mandalorians were being used by the Sith. And when he found that out from Mandalore the Ultimate, he went to seek them out. So again, the reason why Kreia sucks his dick is because he has agency, unlike the rest of the Jedi. He understands the faults and the flaws of the Jedi and the Republic. That's what Kreia is trying to tell you to do, is to open your mind and open your eyes about the Sith philosophy, the Jedi's philosophy, and see that while they may be different, these philosophies are intrinsically, like, destructive. Yeah.
But people have a shit fit because, yeah, Rey has no lightsaber training and beat Kylo Ren in a fight. Yeah, it's fucking...
Yeah, it's fucking Kylo Ren, who was trained by a Jedi Master and a Sith Lord, who's had way more experience in training. He's the fucking grandson of Space Jesus. Like, I know that he looks like a fucking nerd. A fucking white nationalist wannabe, but there's an understandable reason as to why he's skilled. And, just him being beaten by Rey like that so easily, like, it doesn't make him a compelling or interesting villain, unlike someone like Darth Vader, who fucking has killed hundreds of thousands of Jedi, killed his own master in front of Luke, chopped off Luke's hand, can force choke people like miles and miles away from his own spaceship. I don't even think he has to lift his fingers. He could just stare at someone and fucking, like, murder them. He's been responsible for so many genocides, and, him being beaten by Luke is a lot more understandable because it was set up through the series of 3 films of Luke's arc as a character. Kylo gets beaten by some lady who doesn't know how to use a single-handed weapon. It's like, if I was to hand you a fork, or no, let's say you're good at using a bow and arrow, and then I take that away from you and I give you a spear, and I want you to do the same thing you do target practicing wise with the arrows with this spear now, and I want you to tell me if it's going to be easier, harder. Doesn't really matter. It's different. It's a different fighting style, and you're fighting someone with an opponent who has experience with this sort of thing. I'm not saying that Rey is a stranger to fighting. She's just a stranger to fighting in that kind of style. And again, lacks force training. The understanding of how these weapons work. It's fucking stupid.
Kylo Ren, the single biggest wiener to ever enter the series, the Ross Geller of Star Wars, the Sith who gets shoved in a locker by the real Sith and gets his lunch credits stolen.
You're enjoying this a little too much.
I so rarely get to menace innocent young Jedi anymore.
Rey beat up the Star Wars equivalent of the Tiki Torch guy, and people act like that's a fucking surprise.
Hey, don't shit on the fucking Tiki Torch guy. He is the shit.
I mean, I'm not stupid. I know the cries of Mary Sue just amount to girl does something that advances the plot, and
Girl who does stuff that advances the plot. No? I mean, wasn't Poe technically driving the plot, as he was the one who was leading the Resistance Squadron to destroy the fucking Death Planet? Like, how the fuck was Rey supposed to destroy the Death Planet? It's like, I don't get what you mean by female character does stuff and advances the plot. It's like you can still do stuff and it won't mean dick for the plot. Like, you can have a character-driven story and not have the plot affected at all. Except in the case of Star Wars, it usually is a character-driven story, at least from what I could tell from the original trilogy. There was a plot, like, say, in the original Star Wars film. Good guys have bad guy plans. Bad guys want the plans back. That's basically the synopsis. Oh, and bad guys have Death Station to blow up planets. That's it. Everything else is just driven by the characters. Everything moving forward, every decision, every motivation was something done by the characters. There were things obviously happening around them that they had to act and react to. But again, it's all a character-driven narrative, especially in a story like Empire Strikes Back. It's like, that I'd like Pete to show the fucking screenshots where people say Mary Sue equals girl who does stuff that advances the plot. It's like, what words from whose mouth are you taking this shit from? Like, I've never heard a single person say Rey being a Mary Sue is the equivalent of, like, just because she's a female and when she does stuff it advances the plot. It's, no, she does spectacular things without logical explanation, and a series of nonsensical means to cover up lazy storytelling.
That's what made Gen X Star Wars fans have such a fucking conniption. The same people who see Jar Jar and immediately break down in fucking tears.
Who does that? Are you just saying in your previous that, like, those who say that thing about Rey will act the same way about Jar Jar? Like, I don't know a single person who cries about Jar Jar. I think at this point, like, Jar Jar is like the least of people's problems. I think that people would like more Jar Jar in comparison to this. I'm probably sure that people would want a 10-hour montage of just that one clip from Phantom Menace of him stepping in spaceship than watch these trilogy movies.
And that's what makes it so difficult to talk about these movies with anything other than tongue baths. The new Star Wars movies are currently...
No, it's difficult to talk about these films because there's nothing substantial or substantive about them. Like, you've literally said that, like, you don't like these films, and the only thing that you do like about them was Rey. Like, at this point, I don't know why you're still talking. Like, the thing that you like about it has been ruined in your eyes. And now you're saying that in terms of Star Wars, this is a collective problem with Star Wars. It has nothing to do with the poor planning, pacing, and execution of the people behind the sequel trilogy. Like, I think the only film that I had, the only Star Wars film of the Disney canon that I have a single remote amount of investment in was Rogue One. Obviously it comes from, like, a subjective perspective as to why I like it, but at least it was a bit more engaging. I wasn't really as invested with the characters. Like, I thought that, like, they still suffer from the same problems. They're definite blank slates that, yes, have motivations and things to lose. I'd say aside from KTS-04, he was the only interesting character. Other than that, they were all fucking boring. So again, I don't know why you're going on at this point.
The scapegoat of the day for sad internet baby Nazis for having a Lady Jedi in it, and also...
Yeah, if people are whining about a main character being female, they can go fuck themselves. I mean, even in a Star Wars or sci-fi film, like, some of my favorite sci-fi characters are female characters, like Ridley and Sarah Connor. Like, I love those characters to death because they were well-written, well-executed characters with fantastic motivations, they may have come from unique circumstances, and their actions, spawn from those unique circumstances. I definitely wouldn't say their archetypes are. I wouldn't say they weren't brand spanking new at the time. I definitely would agree that by the time Judgment Day and Aliens come out, that it was definitely a thing of its time for well-written female leads in action movies. And Star Wars is no exception to that. Like, Star Wars does have well-written female characters. Like I said before, Ahsoka was not, and Anakin as a foil to go off on to make them more interesting together, and basically can join a relationship as master and apprentice. Began to like her more. We saw her struggle. We saw her fail. We saw her have flaws. I'm going to be skipping ahead to like a segment in later on.
So for the black-clad fascist that rants about degenerates being, stopped.
What did I do?
Trees are nature's solution to climate change, and you can help plant millions.
Did a thing, you guys. Oh, I guess there was an idea.
Team Fight Tactics. Play it now. For free. You know League of Legends, right? Well, it's nothing like that.
I had hoped we'd get
For sad internet baby Nazis for having... And I don't want to risk people thinking that's why I don't like the new movies. Despite my distaste for these movies, I absolutely love Rey.
Why? Why do you love Rey? I thought the thing that you liked intrinsically about her character being a nobody that comes from nothing special being taken away kind of ruined its refreshing take you had on this character. I thought that was one of the main reasons why you liked her character, was because she was refreshing among the other Star Wars character archetypes. It's like, how is that not applicable to someone like Luke or Han? Like, Luke, as far as he knew, just like his father was a traitor, like a space freighter trader or whatever, and then he finds out that his father is a Jedi, and and then he finds out that his father is actually not dead, is actually the guy that's been chasing him across the galaxy and chopped his hand off. It's like, what did Han Solo come from exactly? Like, all we know is that he came from Corellia. We know he's had some shady dealings and is in considerable debt when we first meet him, to the point where he has to, in its original conception of the original Star Wars film, murder some dude, until it changed to self-defense, essentially. Hashtag Hans shot first. Always shot first. Let's just keep going.
She's one of my favorite characters alongside Kreia and Lana Beniko. The new movies introduce a wide variety of new characters and even breathing life into old characters who were previously dull as crap. This is...
Again, it's like I have more questions, and then it's like being answered with the things I have more questions with. It's like, I like Rey because she's a refreshing character. She's refreshing because her character is a new take on old tropes, and even old characters are brought into the mix to be more refreshing. And like I said, I can't argue with Lily's subjective opinion on how he views Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, and Mark Hamill's characters in the original trilogy, but it's like these are characters based on the concept of the hero's journey. The concept and the archetypes might not be original, but the setting, to a certain extent, is original enough. Its concepts original enough for its time, or at least in the times in which nerds cared about consuming different fantasy or sci-fi material, and it's like, sure, you can have that take on their characters. I don't really need new or inspiring. I just like they can have the same archetypes, but it's how they're portrayed, how they are written, how they impact the world around them is what matters to me. Like I said, it's totally subjective. I can't give anyone here an objective standard of what makes a character good. I can definitely say that they say and do things that make sense to their character. You know, there has to be some kind of setup as to why someone would either relapse from a previous flaw or deviate from how their character was portrayed in a previous incarnation. You know, there has to be planning, care, and forethought into it. Like, as far as I can tell, you know, Lily seems to agree that there wasn't much planning or care put into this. Again, I don't know why she feels the need to bash on these older IPs. It's like they did their job. I was entertained. I was inspired as a kid to watch when I watched this. The prequels, I would like. Let's be honest here. Like when we were kids and we're seeing a fucking movie about politics, we're just confused. I was like, are they gonna blow each other up yet? Like, you know, I have like kids having a short attention span and just basically doing the most mundane, you know, shit, that being politics is boring, you know. And like in the case of like the Phantom Menace, the stakes are, well, my people are dying because the death toll is catastrophic on my planet, and the Trade Federation are here and they're denying these allegations, you know. And it's, you know, and the point of that scene is to basically set up the bureaucracy that the old republic has as a government, you know, and that it's corrupt and that there needs to be new power put in place.
This is the first time I ever thought Luke, Han, or Leia were interesting, as they all broke out of the mold they'd originally been stuck in, and exacerbated by the series.
How exactly did they break away from their mold? Like, I know Leia, she might not be a royal princess anymore, but she's still a significant leader, an influential person within the underdog rebellious group. Han Solo went from a husband with a loving wife and son to whatever. You know, it's like, no, not really. They didn't really break away from their molds. Luke, you know, yeah, he broke away, I guess, in a sense. It's like he went from being excited at the prospect of a new tomorrow to being scared of what tomorrow may bring, and fearful, and that fear led him to do the things that he did that would ultimately bring about his tragic demise. As someone that his nephew looked up to, it would lead to the death and the destruction of his Jedi temple. You know, I get what Ryan was trying to do, but it wasn't executed properly. Maybe I should have let Pete go on.
His insistence on retreading their ground. That's all good stuff. But where they tend to bore me is with literally everyone else. Oh look, the villains are another galactic empire. It's another emperor. Oh wait, never mind, it's the old one again. It's another meditation on the way capitalism embeds fascism.
What other film did that? Or are you just saying in movies in general? I don't know.
Thanks for that ice-cold take on the carnivorous and parasitic nature of monolithic corporations, Disney. Okay, I'm being unfair. I'm
gonna be honest, like, I'm not sure how the New Republic was doing things in the galaxy after the Empire was defeated. Like, from what I understood and what I was told, they were demilitarizing the galaxy, and that's how and why the First Order are able to take over so much of it so easily. And in that case, if these businessmen are in, you know, the fucking business of of selling weapons and airships to both factions, it means that they're essentially breaking the law. So on a moral level, they are criminals. Again, I like Mr. Robot's take on the evils of capitalism, more along the lines of there are the rich who will be able to get out of their problems, and then there are the people beneath them who, you know, in a simplistic sense, everything that we do comes down to a matter of money. And when it comes to maintaining your job, your future, and your money, you will you will cross your moral lines quite often in many cases because of this need for incentivization or just money in general. And I mean, you could look at it and say, well, that doesn't sound evil. That just sounds like doing what needs to be done. You know, like I said, again, it's a subjective interpretation. I don't really think that my full-on explanation can do the series justice in terms of how it describes the evils of capitalism. I mean, I will say that the series itself is liberal as fuck. I know what I can quite clearly see what Sam Esmail's political leanings were. I'm not gonna say it was shoved down our throats. Like I said before, there are some subtle instances and some not so subtle instances about politics. And, you know, there are statements made about society, but not a lot of which I've gone out of my way to see or if it was proven that it's true. But anyways, deriving from the point, Cannibalism does suck. Although I'm not 100% sure if it was represented 100% correctly. Although I'll say with 95% assurance that what it was trying to tell, one in which how the First Order gained resources by basically being space pirates and attacking and invading vulnerable settlements, taking these people in, taking their resources, and then using the valuables and goods to basically buy weapons and technologies from these businessmen that I, you know, personally, from consuming this media, have come to the conclusion that they're not evil just because they're businessmen. They're businessmen that do practice outside of the Galactic Republic's law. And you could quite easily point that the failings of the New Republic are probably the greatest of those evils. Their inability to react and act against the First Order, and their ability to police the distribution of weapons and technology across the galaxy.
Explain a little deeper for those not aware. In The Last Jedi, there's a casino city where a bunch of wealthy people hang out called Canto Bight. And when the movie gets there, Rose Tico pretty much looks into the camera and explains that the people there...
This is a blatant fucking lie. She was not a very fun character. I'm going to simplify her character with one moment from The Last Jedi. Like, she's in The Rise of Skywalker, but when she's asked to take on the role of joining their adventures, like, nah, I'm not gonna. Which was probably the best call that JJ could make in that movie, because she is the worst fucking character I've ever seen. Like, I don't know how she's fun in the slightest. But essentially, the First Order is preparing to, like, blow a hole in their base, and Finn, the black guy you're seeing right here, is going to fly his unarmed, ungunned ship, because I never really saw the ships they were using, like, firing jack shit, or really doing anything except, like, trying to not get blown up, is flying this derelict mining ship, this decrepit old mining ship, into the charging beam of the First Order's drill laser, and he's going to sacrifice himself like something out of fucking Independence Day. And Rose Tico comes out of fucking nowhere, even though she, like, pulled out with the rest of everybody except Finn, and crashes into him. Quite possibly would have killed both of them. And Finn pulls himself out of the ship and hops into shit. I just blanked out. Holy shit, Rose's ship. Sorry. And asks, why the fuck did you do that? And she says, we're not gonna win by destroying what we hate, but saving what we love. And as you see her say this, you see the beam fire and blow up the wall, killing the people that they're trying to save. You know, and then she kisses him. It's like, yeah, I could not stop laughing when I saw that. It's like the dumbest setup I've ever seen in a film. It's like, I was convinced at this point that this film was supposed to be some kind of comedy or parody of Star Wars. I don't know why. Like, this is the second film in the trilogy. This is supposed to be the highest point in terms of drama, but like the lowest point in terms for the characters. So, you know.
Got so wealthy by selling weapons to both the Republic and the First Order. Now, this moment was taken as a revolutionary step for the franchise because the characters pretty much go, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, and BreadTube busted a nut over it. But where it tends to lose me is that this isn't new or unique. Canto Bight is basically a Disneyfied version of the Hutt Cartel from the Old Republic, or the Trade Federation from the prequel trilogy. Remember those guys? Corporate overlords who held an entire planet hostage because the government was gonna raise their taxes? There's a fucking scorching hot take for you. We're gonna raise their taxes a bit. Okay, guess we'll massacre these innocent people on some random planet then.
The death toll is catastrophic.
Fucking death toll? It's taxes! Will someone tell Space Amazon to chill the fuck out? Canto Bight is an objectively good scene that suits the story perfectly, but
What? I thought you said everything. Okay.
never personally clicked with it because I already like The Phantom Menace.
Okay, what is liking the like? I get with the parallel you're saying about the rich abusing their power over the weak and the innocent and the helpless and all that good shit or whatever, but Canto Bight is the reason why it's not subversive or interesting or well thought out is why people collectively hate this scene and they fundamentally hate this planet as a whole. Like, anytime Canto Bight is mentioned, like, even casual Star Wars fans will roll their eyes at how cringily terrible it was executed. It's like you have a planet full of rich assholes gambling their money away, and yet they're using human labor instead of droid labor. Like, these greedy assholes are spending their money away, and this casino is basically paying for these kids so they can live and eat and be cared for, at least to somewhat of an extent, instead of just buying droids. Like, I don't get it. Like, I don't get what the advantage of hiring children over hiring adults or a fucking manual labor droid. It's fucking stupid.
I didn't need an abridged version of it, and since this one scene was shown to make or break the film for a lot of people, it warranted a mention. I know.
No, I think finding out that what happened to Luke broke it for a lot of people. I'd say the second. I'd just say I don't even think anyone was pissed off about Canto Bight. I think people were just kind of like confused and rolling their eyes. I'd say the second thing is the light speed jump. No, second thing is Kylo killing Snoke. Third is the light speed maneuver that wipes out most of the First Order's fleet. Fourth thing is Luke Skywalker fucking dying by literally just distracting Kylo, even though it's told in the film after that Luke could have just pulled his airship out of the water and flown to the planet.
The big gimmick of the films is that the First Order are the alt-right, the Galactic Empire's Nazis playing big bad fascists dress up in their literal grandfather's old clothes, but that gimmick runs its course after one movie, and most of The Last Jedi is spent trying to make Darth Wedgie look as much like a tragic character as possible, but then pulling back at the end, and... You know, I'm getting Yellow Diamond vibes here, like the producers are fighting over what to do with not Jason. One wants to just make him a villain, and the other wants to do the Darth Vader, I know there is good in you.
I don't know. It's in that instance, it's like, look, from what I could tell from the movie, I think to a certain extent Han blamed Luke for what happened to his son, because when when Leia tells him that it was Snoke, he's actually like surprised it was Snoke. So I don't know if this, like, I know this was before The Last Jedi was made, but it implies to the audience that Luke either told Han the truth, or he assumed that Luke was to blame for it. You know, his son Ben turning to the dark side. You know, I don't like how they killed off Harrison Ford's character, but like the reason why he's so willing to save his son is because he's his son. He loves his fucking son. He wants to save him, and it's like he has experience. Like he's aware that like powerful people are going to use your skills, your talents and abilities, and then once they're done with you, they're going to toss you aside. Like he's fucked over and been fucked over by every criminal in the galaxy, is what we've been told by the time he is introduced to us yet again. Like he's seen everything and done everything someone in his profession has done. He has experience and he's imparting wisdom to his son. The second instance is retarded in nature because it's like the film is supposed to say don't act upon something as a feeling. So basically don't do what Luke was motivated to do in the past, I want to say 2 films, because he had a feeling or a sense through the Force that his friends were suffering and he went to save them, and then it turns out that they didn't need to be saved and that Luke just gets caught in a trap. Second film, episode 6, he goes through an irrational, almost messianistic way to redeem his father, the second most evil person in the galaxy, because he's convinced to a certain extent that he sensed good in him, and that was the reason why he wasn't killed on the spot there. Or that he has some love for his son despite the fact that he cut his arm off before telling him. It's like, yeah, it's a stupid trope, but at least there is a reasonable means to do it. In Last Jedi, it's stupid, and then like by this time it's fucking Kylo who wants to turn Rey to the dark side, and it's Han ex Machina mixed with like Leia's sort of like holding on to dear life as she like projects this memory of Han to convince their son to turn back to the light and save Rey. I don't know how the fuck he got off the planet because she took his ship, but yeah, it's I'll definitely concede that it's contrived in this trilogy, in the sequel trilogy. I definitely won't say it's the same way in the previous films.
You bit, and I'm not into it. Maybe I would have been into it like 10 years ago, but now it's so boring. Though I do have to say that for all my complaints, Adam Driver gives the kind of performance that really makes me miss
that neck fat he has under his chin, that double chin that he has, and that pouty fucking face he has. Always puts a smile on my face. I know I was smiling when I saw that. I was laughing so hard.
to say that for all my complaints, Adam Driver gives the kind of performance that really makes me miss Hayden Christensen.
Hold on. This whole operation was your idea.
This is my problem with Star Wars. Too many times the series just rehashes the exact same plot with different seasoning. The Civil War trilogy, the 2D Clone Wars.
Yeah, that's because that, like I said before, that's what Chris Avalon said he hated it most about the Force, is because it's just a repetitious pattern, and it's not necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just that's the way the Star Wars universe works, is that there's always going to be a need for balance, and that need for balance is compelled by a force that's greater than anyone alive because they are literally created through this relationship that is the Force. Again, that's not a canonized concept, but at the time that is the philosophical approach that most fans had accepted. And it's in a sort of way, it's the soft tragedy of every property that happens in the sort of chronological timeline thousands of years later, because the KOTOR series takes place, I believe, 3,000 to 5,000 years before A New Hope, but it's supposed to say that this is the status quo of the galaxy until people realize that they are being used by the Force, and that Force sensitives are the most vulnerable to it. And it's the teachings of the two extremes of the Force, that being the Sith and the Jedi, that are one of the major causes for this.
Wars cartoon, Knights of the Old Republic 1, Rebels, Resistance, the First Order trilogy, they all follow the exact same story. Plucky underdog everyman rebels fighting against the evil empire. I'm sure the kids are gonna love it, but for me it's just not fun the 7th time around. And I get the feeling...
No, I mean, I agree with Pete. I would like a Star Wars story where the bad guys are actually the underdogs, and they go up against the good guys, and they have some personal stake where... more in a Walter White sense. It's like, we get why he's doing what he's doing. He has cancer. He's an overqualified professional chemist, and he needs to make a lot of money fast before he dies. It's not really a heroic thing to do, but it's an understandable thing within the concept of, yeah, I get why you're trying to do this. But yeah, it's reasonable that it's like, okay, let's see what this guy's got. Let's see what he's going to do. I'm actually curious to see how things would be perceived from the other side of the coin when, the bad guys are given the focus of the film. Although I'd argue that it is the bad guys that have the focus in the prequel trilogy, because it's all about the fall of the Jedi and why the Jedi philosophically are flawed.
That's the entire motive here. To remake the old movies so that the kids develop their nostalgia filter for Disney-branded films instead of expecting them to watch old films from the 80s that only aging Gen Xers actually enjoy. The Clone Wars trilogy...
I guess so. There is definitely a level of familiarity that the prequels try to emulate from the original trilogy, yet still become its own thing. But it's supposed to be, the story of Anakin. Like, the entirety of the first 6 films are, to a certain extent, the story of Anakin, or more specifically, the story of the Skywalker family. The first half is supposed to be the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker, and then the second half is supposed to be the redemption of Anakin Skywalker, but mostly in the sense of like the third film. A story can have similar story beats to it, so long as it doesn't try to completely emulate something. It can imitate whatever story it wants to do, so long as it's different. The prequels were certainly different, I'll say that. I don't think anyone's going to disagree with me on that regard, whether you think they were good or bad. I still don't think that they were as well made as the original trilogy. There were things about it I liked, just as much as there were things that there were some things I liked and a lot of things I didn't like. But at least I could tell that there was a narrative plan being put in place. I didn't see it when I was a kid, or I didn't see it as clearly when I was a kid. But as I grew up, I definitely saw that there was some planning and intention put behind it. And I don't think anything that was established in this film hindered the progress or what was established in the original trilogy.
were a little bit different, looking at the way the privileged and high-class organizations become corrupt and leave themselves weak to take over by fascists, and The Last Jedi tried to mimic that, but in The Last Jedi, the people who are responsible for the fascist takeover are war profiteers and self-entitled little brats, completely separate from the quote-unquote good guys.
They're opportunists. I don't get what this hyperbole is supposed to be. It was just uninspired backwater noise, honestly. I really had little investment in this storyline. It's like just the whole concept of a hyperspace tracker is fucking ridiculous. It's not unreasonable, but it's just stupid in the sense that it's like there isn't like a different or better way or a less contrived way for them to resolve this problem, or just go a different story route with this. Like, when I was writing my critique for The Last Jedi, I had a totally different plan, and that was that the rebel faction gets split up, and there's one group that's being pursued by the Empire, and the other one, a much smaller group, that is on the run and contemplating whether or not they should go back and help or go their own way. It's not the best idea, I'll admit, but it's definitely something that can be rewritten or reworked on that can be different. It's like, okay, the good guys get away at the beginning of the first fight. How do they find them so that fucking Snoke doesn't kill General Hux? Oh, we have a lightspeed tracker that the Supreme Leader who founded this organization didn't fucking know about. Wonderful. Fucking wonderful.
In the Clone Wars trilogy, the people responsible were the Jedi. They started the cock-up cascade that led to the Republic falling in the first place.
Yes and no. I'd say it's more in part. It has more to do that the dark side was clouding their vision, and they couldn't see things clearly in terms of what they needed to do. And from my understanding, that's why they inserted themselves more into politics and being more concerned with the well-being of the Republic rather than the greater galaxy. Although if I was to remember back from the extended universe canon, when the Jedi were discovered by the Republic, their intention was to serve the Republic and not just be these wandering monk warriors who would free the slaves like Anakin thought in The Phantom Menace. It's them just being more concerned with the now and dealing with what information they can have and playing the game of politics. That's basically my explanation for how Palpatine was able to get away with this for so long. It's like members of the Republic, citizens of the Republic take a blood test, and that blood test determines whether or not you have the midichlorian count to become a Jedi. Given the fact that the Emperor's Palpatine's background comes from a place of politics and place of influence on Naboo, I find it quite likely that his parents was able to manipulate those scorings, or they just didn't want to risk their heir to their fortune and their name to be taken from them. I guess you could say, although that's like putting in a lot of money and effort to just not fuck again and have another kid. I guess pragmatism at its best. But no, I will agree that there's a certain level of corruption with the Jedi. And to a certain extent they've been keeping secrets, they've been working on their own agendas, but again, I'd say it's the problem with that they just can't see what the Sith are up to. They're convinced in The Phantom Menace that the Sith are extinct, but they do know that the dark side has clouded their vision, And they don't know that the Sith made a clone army that would wipe them all out. If they knew that, they wouldn't have used the army. I don't know. I don't think the Republic would have had the time to amass the resources to come up with a well enough trained force to go against a droid army that was literally cloned and trained by a Mandalorian warrior like Jango Fett. So yeah. I'd say if they knew that there were, I'm from what I know from Attack of the Clones, they knew that there was some dicey circumstances to the clones' conception on Kamino. But from what I can tell, they willingly accepted it because they didn't have the time and the resources. It would have been a different story. It might have been a different story if they knew that the Sith had something to do with it, but they never do. The only clue that Obi-Wan has is that Jango was hired by some guy named Tyrannus, and from what Obi-Wan learns from the Kamino High Counselor or High Chancellor or whatever, that a Jedi named Sifo-Dyas, who we know nothing about in The Phantom Menace, who died 10 years ago around the time of The Phantom Menace, ordered the creation of the clone army. That's it. Like, it had a mystery, but it wasn't really a well executed or well set up one. I didn't know who the fuck Sifo-Dyas was. I didn't really give a shit who he was. All I knew was he was a Jedi who apparently went ahead with the creation of a clone army without the Republic knowing or approving it. Again, I'm very confused how this happened to begin with. Very, very convoluted indeed. Again, I'd still say that it's just as much as the fault of... I wouldn't say it's as much of the fault of the Jedi as it is the Sith. With the circumstances that George Lucas had provided, it seemed like a quite open and shut case as to why Palpatine would be able to get away with what he'd been doing for such a lengthy period of time. And then being able to manipulate Anakin the way he did, it makes sense.
The people set up as the good guys in the series up to this point were the ones causing all the problems. That's just more interesting. Knights of the Old Republic 1 was like a Kingdom Hearts version of the Civil War trilogy, where it's retold almost frame by frame and word for word. By contrast, Knights of the Old Republic 2 was a lot more nuanced and interesting and started the trend in Star Wars where jaded Sith Lords are often the most interesting and refreshing characters in the series. Kreia, the Empire's Wrath, Lana Beniko, Darth Imperius, Darth Mar, Empress Asina, they've all been stellar and standout characters precisely
I don't know who most of these characters are. And just given off the bullshit that Pete said, I'll just chop it down to subjective preference. I'll agree with Kreia. Again, she's a jaded nihilist who has an interesting perspective on the galaxy and the Force. And I'll leave it at that.
Because they're jaded and disassociated from the fascist ideology of half the Empire while not immediately turning around and becoming a pacifist extremist.
I'll say they have different goals and agendas. I mean, Kreia doesn't really give a shit about the Empire in the sense that it's a looming threat, and that's why Revan isn't in the second game, is because he went off to find the Sith again. And Kreia's role was mostly to find, train you so you could go off and help Revan, except that amounts to jack shit because the exile gets killed and Revan gets captured. So it seems like it just took what was promised and what was developed by these two games and kind of just flushed it down the toilet in the namesake of just an epic story that kind of just made a reason to bring back the Emperor. That's pretty much it. That's all the Revan storyline seems to achieve is provide some context to where Revan had been in KOTOR 2 and to bring back the Emperor. That's it.
Extremist and needlessly dragging out the story.
Charging through the jungle to rescue me. How romantic.
Don't forget the part where I wring the Chancellor's neck.
You can argue about the quality of these stories, and it varies wildly, but at least they explore new territory and do new things. By contrast, the sequel trilogy...
I can easily advocate why Pete, why Lily would advocate why she likes these stories and characters is because she's the one making the choices. Again, that's the same argument I'd make for why Revan is a flawed character, because you can make mistakes and decisions that can, well, one, it can get you killed. So I don't know if the number of times you get killed for stupid combat decision making counts as being a flawed character. But, like, I just throw this argument at Pete, is it's like, you can pick and choose certain characters, from what I understand, you can have around in this game. I know that for certain quests and missions and storylines, you're stuck with certain characters. Others will be brought along with you, but it still falls within the sense that it's like, you can still choose the characters you like from the ones you dislike and just tolerate the ones that you're somewhat indifferent about, while still having the characters that you like around with you. So, yeah, I could see jaded, but I've never played these games. And I think the only reason why some of these characters, I'd say more along the lines of is that the members of the Empire have different goals aside from just force power. It's political power. It's, it's having other, it's more along, falling more along the lines of, achieving a certain place in the Empire, and once you've done it, you can have it run your way. That's essentially what it is. It's like, I don't need to worry about bureaucracy and politics. If I'm unhappy with something that the Dark Council is doing, if I'm strong enough and I've worked myself hard enough up the hierarchy, I can just overthrow them and just have things be run my way.
Trilogy spends way too much fucking time pontificating on the cultural significance of Star Wars and fandom, to the point that Luke's entire character arc in The Last Jedi may as well...
The importance of Star Wars and fandom is that there's no fandom, Star Wars as a franchise suffers. That's why you should care about fandom, and that's why you should value the opinions of the fandom. It's simple as that.
Will be a YouTube video titled "Your Headcanon About Luke is Garbage and Here's Why," which, by the way, I'm currently 50% of the way through the script for. And while I'm all for deconstructing fandom, that's a deconstruction that...
I look quite forward to ripping that to shreds as well.
Should have ended with The Force Awakens. Picking it back up and dragging it over the coals again in The Last Jedi always felt like a wasted opportunity. Funnily enough, The Old Republic serves as a microcosm of Disney's Star Wars properties with the onset of Rebels, Resistance, and The Mandalorian. See, in SWTOR, you have 4 Force-using classes and 4 Force-blind classes, and the good stories are found in the Force-using classes because of course they are.
Well, that's subjective, Pete. Like, I've seen your review for SWTOR, and it mostly seems to focus on like the diversity of, despite what faction you may choose, you can pick a certain allegiance to the Force, whether that's light or dark or somewhere in the middle. But some people do have preferences for not being a Force sensitive user. Like, from what I remember, like one of the biggest appeals of the Old Republic games is you could be a Force using like gun, blast, a blaster class character. It's a versatility sort of thing. That's kind of one of the reasons why I don't like SWTOR, is it gives you a set role character instead of like let me building my character from the grounds up like the Old Republic games.
It's fucking Star Wars. Oh, do you want to be a smuggler or an Imperial agent? Well, here you go. Let me know when you're ready to play a real character. While the game has 8 characters, the story after the class campaigns is explicitly written with the Jedi Knight and Sith Warrior in mind, and the other 6 are just...
Okay, well, I mean, that's sort of a narrative flaw with for the programmers and the writers of the story. Like, just because you're not force sensitive doesn't mean that you can be subject to a force trance. Like, just because you use a blaster doesn't mean you could take on someone like Revan or the Emperor. It's like, it does seem a bit unrealistic, but it's an MMO. Like, it has broken mechanics that people can exploit. You know, people just want to play the story that they want, and they're content with playing the role that they want. Just because you have more doesn't always mean it's better. I guess you could say that, but then again, I haven't played this game. I just know that the biggest reason why I haven't played this game is because I don't like playing a game where you have a set role, or you are a certain class with certain advantages or disadvantages that certain ones have. I don't mind having a culminative story where you can play. If I remember correctly, I think the maximum number of characters you could play on a basic account for SWTOR was 3 or 4. Maybe it was 2. I don't remember. But you know, you playing these roles basically lets you play a wider role and gets you all the pieces of the story, of at least the base story before the expansions.
Just kind of hanging out. Meanwhile, I lost interest in Resistance almost immediately at this line in the trailer.
Can you imagine what it's like to be an ace pilot?
No. Because this is Star Wars, not fucking Top Gun.
I'm sorry, what did Luke want to be? He wanted to be a star pilot. What did Anakin want to be? He wanted to be a star pilot. The best one in the galaxy, like no one ever was. I don't know. I don't get it. People identify with different characters for different reasons. You can't, you can't tell me. I'm not saying that Resistance is a good story. It's fucking dog shit. I'm just saying you can't say that someone can't identify with someone who doesn't want to be a pilot in the real world. I don't know. It seems kind of stupid and hyperbolisly opinionated to me.
I'm reminded of how some people claim the heart of Star Wars is the space battles. Now, if you're someone who believes that, who believes the heart of Star Wars is the short scene in the Death Star trench, I'd like to ask what mirror universe you're actually from.
The mirror universe where there's something called the hero's journey, where a character struggles to basically come out from the status quo and then return back to a place of familiarity after learning about the world and learning about themselves and struggling and coming to conflict with the things around them and within them. And you can't sit there and tell me that those moments weren't happening when Luke was, or just the entirety of the trench run, when literally the death and destruction of the rebellion was in a matter of mere minutes. The tensions were high. I'm not saying this is the essential heart of Star Wars. I'm saying I can see why people would see the trench run as something significant in terms, this is me saying that George Lucas intended to emulate the hero's journey, like most fantasy stories do. I forgot. I think it was the movie called Winx with Will Smith in it. The one about the elves, or the real worlds with fantasy creatures. It still has those tropes about the main character, chosen one-esque sort of thing. It's I know Pete said this a little while ago about the whole chosen one trope, but Luke wasn't the chosen one. His father was the chosen one. His job after his father restored balance to the Force was to basically train a new and better version of the Jedi. So, you know, like, I get where Pete's coming from, but, like, I'd say if the heart of Star Wars is about those fucking cows in The Last Jedi, I'd say I'd be right on Pete's side. You know, everyone has their moment, but I'd kind of be laughing hysterically if you said the heart of Star Wars was about some old man lactating some horny, like, space cow, you know, just to show us how he eats and drinks every day. Like, you know, this was a coming of an end of Luke's arc in the story. It was him, you know, giving into, or I guess you could say, like, having faith in the Force, not relying on technology like the Empire does, and using his instincts and the feelings to make the shot. I know that might sound something counterproductive to what I was arguing about Rey and Force-sensitive people, but it's not just because, like, Luke made that shot just because he was Force-sensitive. He made the shot because, one, Biggs and Wedge was, like, giving him time to make the shot, and Biggs gets killed. Wedge gets shot, and he's like, I can't stay in here or I'm gonna get destroyed. And, you know, I'm pretty sure that Wedge was Luke's friend. You know, said, you know, we've already lost one of us. You know, like, there's nothing more you can do. Like, get out of here. And Vader's about to fucking, like, blow up Luke, and Han comes and saves him. It's not like just because you're Force sensitive, you're some god. Like I said, the story sets up things, and people have arcs, and those arcs come to fruition in full circle because it is cathartic. Because human beings, are just living things in general, are creatures that crave catharsism. When you have a story that has a setup but not a satisfying conclusion, people tend to be pissed off about it, like The Last Jedi. That's why often people tout this movie as a disrespectful service to not only Star Wars and its history, but to the fans as well. The people who actually care about the films, like you, Pete, who actually, you know, are paying to go see these movies up until that point, and maybe buying the merch. I don't really know what the toy sales were. I just know that they completely fucking plummeted after The Last Jedi came out. Like, no one wanted to buy the fucking Rose Tico toys. No one wanted the Admiral Holdo action figure. And it's, you know, calling her, like, SJW purple hair is just a derogatory slur to be like, we know what this movie is appealing to. And, like, I don't know if this is 100% true, but just the audience that they're appealing to, the LGBT, you know, liberal left-leaning side of the coin, you know, who, from what I can quite possibly tell, most of them probably wouldn't give a shit about Star Wars or buying the merchandise. I don't want to say that's an absolute fact. It's just an assertion I'm making. That's only what I hear, what people are saying. And it's definitely quite evident during the, you know, the following point of The Last Jedi, is that people are assuming that these people that hated the film were a vocal minority. But it turns out that there are a lot of people of a lot of differing genders and races who hated this film, or hated that film, because it doesn't even try to be deconstructive, and it tries to actively avoid emulating anything that these fans of Star Wars find cathartic about it. And, you know, that's what mirror universe we're living in, Pete, not you're living in, or someone else is living in. This is what we're all living in. This is the world we live in, and that's most of what I just said is a fact.
Because here in the real world, this is the heart of Star Wars.
Yeah, it's lightsaber fights, and this just goes on and on for, yeah, about here. Just for like the entirety of like a good 5, 6, 7.5 minutes. It's just epic space battles with intense and dramatic music. You know, often people would tout something like this as filler because it's like nothing really happens until someone actually gets killed. It's normally a tense and interesting moment because we don't really know how it's going to turn out upon our first viewing. And typically we want the good guy to win and the bad guy to lose. And I mean, to a certain extent, that's why people, when Empire Strikes Back first came out, they hated it, was because the bad guys won. It was a very dark, gritty, depressing story, with the horrifying revelation, or at least for the character, because I know that people cared about Luke, because they saw so much of themselves in him, and it's basically the equivalent of him being taunted and traumatized by Vader to break his will, essentially, to tell him that this man that his friend Ben Kenobi looked up to and saw as a brother during the Clone Wars is actually the guy that murdered him, chopped off his hand, tortured his friends, chased him across the galaxy, is his father. Any sane person would probably have the same reaction if they found that out. Probably not as dramatic, but they'd probably be just as upset or horrified, and even in a sense a lot in denial about that fact. So, this is what Pete essentially believes is the heart of Star Wars, is lightsaber fights with epic music. And all I really have to say about that is, man, you must have really hated The Last Jedi, because there was not a single lightsaber fight in that movie. Not even a single lightsaber touched in that film. So I guess that's one more reason why you hate or just are disappointed and dislike this new trilogy. That is my coy argument to make about this long-winded and unnecessary long point, instead of just saying I like the lightsaber fights. They're cool.
Now your republic shall fall.
If I were making a Star Wars story, I wouldn't prioritize space battles. What I would prioritize is swinging a lightsaber, throwing shit with the Force, lightning, choking a whelp, freeing slaves, Jedi ladies kissing Sith ladies, punching corrupt politicians, killing corrupt politicians, and maybe, if there's time, talk about the systemic rot inherent to capitalist democracy. Or
sure, as long as it's well written. I mean, it's like, you have ideas of how you want to go about your story, but it's like, okay, but you need to execute them logically.
just throw Space Bezos off a cliff. You don't fixate on being an ace pilot or a bounty hunter, you fixate on being a Jedi or a Sith or both.
Why? Why not? I mean, can't you, like, spice runners and bounty hunters are just as an essential part of the story as the Sith. They may not be, okay, they're not as essential, but they still play a role and are a living and breathing part of this galaxy. You know, they have a role to play, they have a story to be told, and the quality of that story depends on, you know, the intentions and the planning that the writer has, and in a certain extent the balls that they have to go to certain lengths to either subvert or you know, tell this story. Like, Mr. Robot is the most loopholiest story I've ever seen in my life that I could probably argue, like, despite how much I'd gush about it, has its fair share of problems, because there seems to be not necessarily, like, inconsistencies with the character's general motivations, but how Sam Esmail, like, portrays the motivations of some of these characters. and I'm like, okay. You know, and this is more in a matter of hindsight. It's like I feel like every season, the story and the movie, or you know, the story and the overarching narrative like takes a different tone, and like the rule set and the motivations of the characters just seem to differ or deviate slightly. And it's obviously in the spirit of a clever misdirection. I'm always expecting a twist, but here's the thing: in most cases, I never seem to see it coming, and that's because it plays on your sense of what is real and what is not. And you know, we're being given this perspective from Elliot, our unreliable narrator, who is an antisocial, paranoid hacker genius, who, you know, despite his many talents and gifts, gets fucked around a lot. Like, he gets the shit beaten out of him a lot by people. You know, even though, like, in those cases, afterwards he'd come out on top. Although coming out on top is just him, you know, sending that person to jail. That's pretty much what it amounts to. Or, I think so. Yeah, I don't think Elliot has a kill count. I don't remember. I think other than himself, that's the only kill count he has.
Both, cause screw you, because that's who drives the story of Star Wars.
I definitely say so in the story of the Skywalkers. Not necessarily because they're powerful. Like, there are characters in the extended universe who are not force sensitive, like Thrawn, who was able to find methods and means to overcome the Jedi's ability to use the Force by literally acquiring like a salamander species that made a bubble that would make him immune to the Force, like manipulation, Force push, Force pull, you know. And it's not too far-fetched for something like that to exist in the universe of Star Wars, and it just goes to further develop Thrawn as an intellectual, statistical genius. Like, his big differing aspect from him and Vader is, like, they're both intimidating characters, but, like, when one of his minions fails, he asks him why they failed, and he explains why, and then he says correct, and now you've been promoted to the head of this research department for, say, tractor beams. Because in one of the scenes in the book, they're literally trying to pull Luke Skywalker into Thrawn's Star Destroyer, and he light speeds away. And it's this really tense moment where everyone's looking at the guy who's manning the tractor beam, and like I said before, he asks him to explain. And because he answered correctly, he didn't get murdered, he got promoted. That is one of the differing aspects between Thrawn and Vader. So yeah, you know, like, you can have a character who is as alien and intimidating as Vader, and not be super powerful in the magical or, you know, metaphysical sense like a Sith or Jedi, because they have charisma, because they have you know, skills and interests and motivations that the characters find interesting. Like, I get it. You like what's the Dragon Ball equivalent of screaming and firing lasers at each other until someone goes down and dies. Like, I get it. You like superpowered people are cool. Okay, like, why do people like Batman then? It's like, he's not super powerful. He's a character that the story like, why are there characters in, like, even the original trilogy, the prequel and sequel trilogy, that focuses on characters that aren't force sensitive? There are other characters who are driving the story, like other people that are involved and have stakes and propel it forwards. Although I'd say most definitely in the case of the sequel trilogy, it's quite bullshit in some of those instances. I will agree that most of the stakes involving the conflict in the galaxy is about the balance of the Force, and that balance mostly focuses on those who are actually aware and sensitive to the presence of the Force. But then again, that's still a very shallow approach and concept to viewing Star Wars. Like, you can have this subjective interpretation, Pete, but like, to argue what you said about Star Wars becoming very repetitious and boring is because of that aspect. It's because of this conflict between the light side and the dark side that spawns around the Jedi and the Sith that makes these stories so repetitious. It's just that the ordinary people that are involved are just basically like not super powered civilians that pray to God they don't come into contact with these superpowered individuals. I'm not saying that wiping out the Jedi and the Sith is the solution to things. I'm just saying that there are characters like Han, and for a good portion of the original trilogy, Leia, who are just ordinary people, just doing regular shit. I'd even say Episode 1 Anakin, Padme through the trilogy, fucking C-3PO and R2-D2 was driving the story of the original Star Wars film for at least almost a good a fifth of it. I'll be fair, a good fifth of it. And they still remained relevant and interesting and integral to the story. Not just in a plot mechanic that R2-D2 has the fucking plans, but they actually helped with our heroes like escape and maneuver through the Death Star, getting the plans, from Obi-Wan to Alderaan, and then from the Death Star to the Rebel base. You could look at shit as simple as that. Like, one of my favorite characters is a fucking assassination droid whose every beginning line is either statement, query, sarcasm, apologies, something like that, to basically describe, because they have it has no fluctuation in tone. And it's such a wisecracking, somewhat insubordinate robot that willingly has to agree with what its master is doing, but it's like, I want to kill everything and anything around me because that's what I'm programmed to do. And it's not like it's just kill, murder, destroy, eliminate. It's like, here, let me tell you the interesting ways of murdering a Jedi, or why murdering a Jedi is just so satisfying. And I'm like, okay. It's stuff like that. It's like, I want to hear what his answer is. And obviously everything most of what I'm saying about why I like a certain character is completely subjective, but there is care and effort into making these characters interesting. It's not just superpowers that what makes you interesting. I'd really love to see your take on the MCU, or at least post Phase 2 MCU, and not tell me that the key to making and humanizing these superpowered characters isn't making them relatable and, humble to a certain extent, and having flaws, and in certain circumstances being stripped of those powers. That's why I really didn't like the Captain Marvel movie, because she's given this chance to fight her antagonist on an even playing field, and she's like, no, fuck you. I'm just gonna knock you out and just act like I didn't need to learn anything from this story. It's like, sure, you don't have to learn anything from it. Tharsism gone. It has nothing to do with the fact that I'm a guy. It's not that, like, I would enjoy seeing a female power fantasy of some superpowered chick overpowering some guy. It's like, I'd mostly be confused because, honestly, like, the setup in that deleted scene was just total horse shit, even from a legal standard. you know, so if your answer is just like saying fuck you, like I know what you're saying better than you, and just like having superpowers is what makes a character more interesting, it's like no, it really doesn't. It might give you some advantages over other people, but at the same time it might give you certain disadvantages, like, you know, there's a relationship that someone can have when being force sensitive, and, you know, under certain circumstances, if you're with someone who isn't capable of having those experiences or understanding these feelings or feeling these feelings that you do, it's quite hard for them to empathize, and in a certain extent you can become disconnected from those people, or at the same time you could be overly attached to these people, more so than, you know, non-sensitive people would be, because you literally have the sensation of the universe drawing you to a particular person, just because of like whatever connection or relationship, emotionally and or otherwise, you have with this person.
Of course, the Republic and the Empire are built around the ancient rivalries between the Jedi and the Sith, and that's why they keep coming back and starting this shit all over again. In SWTOR, that is the central theme, and even the non-Force using classes are built around how they manage their day-to-day lives when space wizards keep tearing the galaxy apart over who uses a space magic better. And it's the first time the non-lightsaber characters...
Well, it's not about who uses it better, it's what interpretation of the Force is superior over the other, although I'd say that's more of what the Sith is concerned about, is basically proving that the dark side of the Force is superior to the light. I don't really think the stake for the Jedi is always better. It's just we have our way, we have our creed and our code, and we're supposed to protect the people and not govern our own self-interests over the interests of other people. It's basically just a simple dichotomy of two diametrically opposed factions. I wouldn't really chop down the stakes of these two factions down to which interpretation or who uses the Force better. It's like I said, it just always seems to come down to a matter of fate and destiny in these types of stories.
In Star Wars have been anything close to interesting. Scrubbing that away just to create the watered-down environment of plucky underdog rebels against the Space Authority Part 20 and continuously contriving reasons for this to keep happening are not actually making anything better. The Force Awakens goes as far as to destroy the Republic simply because the two sides being on an equal footing doesn't gel.
I don't think, like I said before, I don't think that's what the Force Awakens was setting up. Like, I'm pretty sure, like, from what most people would assume before The Last Jedi came out, is that the First Order were pooling all their resources into this weapon to, one, basically prevent the Resistance from continuing to getting funding and support. That's the reason why they destroyed the New Republic. Even though I'd say more as the faction, it would make more sense for them just to destroy the faction, because if they were to find out this weapon would exist, then the full brunt of their resources would be unleashed upon them, essentially. You know, but what is stated in that film is we are going to basically take away the funding and support that the Resistance has. That's it. So yeah, that's why these planets were destroyed.
With the underdog fantasy, it's boring.
Okay, I mean, you could interpret that it's the underdog fantasy, but it's like, I just think a lot of people assume that the First Order were the underdogs in this case. And then, you know, you could say late into Force Awakens and, you know, the beginning of, actually, the fucking title crawl. Because, like, literally the line is, the First Order reigns. Which means, despite the fact that they lost their super weapon, they still have the resources to take over the galaxy. And it's like, the Resistance can't do shit. In fact, like, the time gap between The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker is 5 years, and by that time they've overtaken the galaxy. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the projections and predictions that Rey had given Luke from Leia, from what I can assume, is that the First Order has already begun to take over the grand majority of the galaxy and would probably seize control of most of it by the time, the film is over, whether or not the Resistance was destroyed or not, which seems unprecedentedly, ridiculous to me. Again, you could say that's a subjective interpretation to me, but that's what I assumed. The Empire was the dominant power in the galaxy, and the Resistance were the underdog, or the Rebels were the underdogs. And once they were taken down, and control of the galaxy's resources were given to the good guys, they would become a diminished force over time, and perhaps, would tear themselves apart, or maybe even defect from the Empire and try to join back into the New Republic, because the incentivization would be more appealing to pick the winning side or join the winning side, if you get what I mean. The First Order is supposed to be the real world equivalent of the Nazis hiding in Argentina. I don't think the Nazis have a death weapon or a massive army. To me, that sounds, from the way JJ described it, they're the underdogs. They're the defeated faction that are beginning to rise from the ashes of 30 decades of, peace in the galaxy, and are wishing to restore their place in it. That's it.
Likewise with the deep lore fandom metagame nonsense like, how did they get the Death Star plans, or what the...
I don't think anyone asked how they got the Death Star plans. I don't think anyone wanted Rogue One or Solo, to be honest. I don't get what validation this point has. Give me polls and screenshots of influential and their influential people and their followers saying, we want stories that are fundamentally unnecessary, like Solo and Rogue One. Again, I said, I don't hate Rogue One. I don't think it's a well-made film. It's definitely the best made film of the Disney Star Wars franchise. But aside from that, they're all dog shit. I fucking hate the fact that there's an LGBT robot that's been in the Millennium Falcon since A New Hope. Or, not an LGBT robot, but, a robot, a humanitarian robot who wants rights for humans, or rights for robots, but, hate humans. Or at least most organics in general, but just does it in a very SJW sort of way. But my point still stands. I don't think anyone wanted these two films like Solo and Rogue One.
And Solo's story, when a sensible person would respond to that with a resounding, who the fuck actually cares? And in the case of Solo, that's exactly what people did, because as much as hardcore fandom likes to pretend otherwise, filling in the backstory for every single character is a stupid fucking idea. It'd be like trying to make a sequel to Harry Potter and deciding that instead of focusing on the core fundamental element that made that story work in a kid and...
You mean the Chosen One? The thing that you said you hate and is repetitious and fantasy platforms like Star Wars? No, that's not what it's about.
And his best friend growing up together, they decided to just hyperfixate on a different Dark Lord this time.
So Star Wars hasn't been doing that. They've technically been fixating on the same Dark Lord of the past 9 films, technically. How is that not how do none of those films focusing on growing up and spending time with the people you care about? I don't get it. I don't get how shifting focus from the good guy characters to a villain is better or worse in any way. Like, most people like people like stories nowadays about where the focus is shifted and where the motivations and reasons why the villains do things for admittedly morally ambiguous but like empathetic reasons are understandable. From what I know about Grindelwald is that he had a vision about World War II and that the Muggles were going to start another world war and that it should be up to them and this society that he's creating to stop another world war from happening. Like, I get it. Like, I don't think there's a single person in this room who wouldn't want to try to stop World War III. And we all know what World War III is going to be. It's going to be fucking nuclear bombs. We're going to just fucking nuke each other at this point. I don't think anyone wants World War III.
Time around and fill in all the continuity and backstories for characters that nobody asked for. And come on, Warner Brothers would never do something stupid like that.
Oh yeah, that lady is Sneaky. I forgot. Huh. Yeah, I don't really think an author needs to ask what its audience does or doesn't want. You know, just so long as, like, how it's executed makes logical sense. Like, I think it's a difficult thing to say because it's more along the lines of, like, there's the authorial intent and then there's the death of the author, and it's like the most objective take and interpretation is what the author has said and done within the story to establish the facts of the universe, the logic and the consistency of the story. And you know, and it's the same way with Star Wars when it comes to the death of the author, because you know, the preferences and wants and needs of the fandom begin to supersede the authorial intent of what Lucas had set off to do in the prequel trilogy. So it's like in this case it's like when you're a writer and you're in a profession that your livelihood depends on the number of sales that you want, of course you'd give a fuck, especially in this day and age, like what the majority of people want. And I think most, if not every human being on the planet likes cathartic stories, you know, that have a exposition and then a rising action and then the ever so dramatic climax, the falling action, and then the resolution, and then maybe the denouement. You know, it's how stories work. Basically, it's why people give a shit about sort of things, is because they like the conflict, they like the escalation, and then finally the highest point. You know, it's a trend in storytelling that, like, usually, like, if you have something like a trilogy like Star Wars, it's usually the second film that's going to have the biggest impact on people, because in more of the narrative placements of things, this is the climax of the trilogy. It's, you know, A New Hope is the rising action, where in the exposition where we learn about the universe, we learn about the different groups and factions, and of course it has a natural, a 5-act structure to it. I'm just saying more on the lines of overall the 3 films. That's normally how it's structured. But then again, I do say when Empire came out, it was quite hated by critics. I don't remember what the audiences thought of it. So I can't really comment on that. I just know that early on critics hated this film, and I wouldn't find it too far beyond the realm of believability that people bought into what these critics were saying and either didn't see the film or, you know, just blindly agreed with these critics after they saw it. Because what you're seeing is essentially the good guys losing. I definitely say I haven't seen a lot of films in around that time period. I think the only film that I can think of off the top of my head is Aliens 3, because its opening basically like takes away Ripley's happy ending. You know, like Newt dies, you know, Sean Bean's character dies, you know, at the beginning, and it makes enough sense as to why there would be a face hugger that got into the ship, because the Queen, you know, was somehow able to lay a final larva in there. And I wouldn't really say I call it a defeat. I just say that why most people don't like it is because this story just has such a horrible and dark opening. And I think that's just why in that day and age when that film came out, most people gave it a negative reception. You know, these new films, like, the problem with them has nothing to do with tone. It has nothing to do with presentation. It has to do with logical storytelling. That's it. But yeah.
If I were in control of Star Wars, I'd rewrite the sequel trilogy to be about Rey and her light side Sith wife stomping out the Imperial
Light side Sith wife. I forgot that was a thing.
remnants and bringing back the idea that the Force is inherently neutral, and put the two of them at the center of a main conflict where Luke appreciates that.
No, the Force is not inherently neutral. Like, I think the only thing I agree with Kathleen Kennedy is that the Force is female. Because the Force can't make up its fucking mind. First it wants balance, and then it supposedly achieves balance, but then for some reason it realizes that it was never in balance, and then it essentially, the Force is the most destructive element of the Star Wars universe because it is responsible for so much death and destruction in the galaxy. Before the Disney, extended universe canon was responsible for trillions of deaths over thousands and thousands of years. It's like, this is just like, I get what you want. You want your gay representation. It's like, if you want gay Star Wars representation, just look up porn or some shit like that. Like, if you want to tell your story so bad, why don't you draw a gay Star Wars lesbian comic? I don't really give a shit. It's like, I don't know how that would, like, who are you saying that this is good just for you? I'm assuming that, like Pete never says what the appeal is supposed to be. I'm assuming it's to LGBT people. If that's the case, I am sure, I am quite sure that people are like, those people are still going to be dissatisfied with it. Not just in the sense that, like, just having one gay couple isn't good enough. It's just that there are actual, like, rational, reasonable people in your community saying, like, maybe instead of just having representation or just sacrificing creative thinking and storytelling with shallow gay representation, why don't we just make a story and make a franchise that actually, like, gives a healthy perspective on LGBT representation, but at the same time we put it in a form where we don't shove it down our throat. We make it digestible, but it's like, oh, that takes too much fucking effort, and that's ultimately the thesis of most people's problems with these films, Pete. Is, yeah, sure, they look nice, and that's because fucking Disney has a lot of money. It does, like, sure, give it an award for fucking CGI or whatever. I don't give a shit. Like, the Lightspeed run looked nice in The Last Jedi. Like, I think the throne room fight was alright in the sense where it's like, it's not like a crazy shake cam or like, it's like most of it was, or the opening of it, a good series or portion of it was just a one shot. The problem is that there were so many elements of it that were being CGI'd out. I don't know how people didn't notice that when they saw it. I think I was just mostly impressed in the fact that I liked how that fight started off, and I think that anyone who does fight scenes in that sort of manner or fashion should take notes from that scene. It was very well done for the most part, and I think that people highly underestimate the appeal of the one shot.
Rey is taking out the Imperial Remnant, but really hates the fact that she's doing it while hooking up with a Sith lady who takes a more pragmatic approach to the Force and have a dual theme of the Sith Order's self-destructive tendencies and the Jedi Order's notorious myopia and hypocrisy, all wrapped up in some really good character interaction because that's what makes a story really stick together. Yeah, it might not be philosophically deep or be able to serve as a vector for someone to talk about Joseph Campbell, but it'd be new, it'd be something we don't see very often.
I mean, I guess it could be philosophically deep, but again, it depends on how much effort you want to put in with. It's just like at the end of the day, it's like, how much do you care about this? It's like I've been working on a Ruby story for the past 2 years, and I still haven't finished the first chapter because one, I'm on the fence about certain narrative decisions that I'm making, and at the same time I'm a little bit apprehensive to the certain limitations I'm setting myself to with. And I'm having to force myself to make these compromises, and every day when I'm writing something new, I'm always being tempted with this fact where I could just take it the same approach how Miles and Carries did it at the beginning of Volume 6, and just say, oh, everything was resolved, everything was taken care of, just a whole bunch of stupid contrivances sacrificed in the name of narrative effort at at the very least I'm making this change to give the Kingdom of Mistral some development. At the very least, make it a breathed and lived in place so its audience gives a fuck about its people and actually does care when the bad guys show up and plan to do the horrible, awful things that they're going to do. You can have interesting characters with a great story that makes sense and also be deeply philosophical. Like, first story that comes to mind would probably be Breaking Bad, and also because just in the sense that it does subtle social commentary that it wasn't really even intending to set out to do, like the drug wars and healthcare, shit like that. But yeah, anyways, that's what Pete wants, basically, is that like all this bitching and complaining about the problems with Star Wars from her perspective. It's hers. She can have her own perspective. She can think of Star Wars however the fuck she wants to, but it's hers, and all we can really do is mock her for having it. Just remember that, everyone. Don't try to take someone's opinion away. Don't let anyone take your opinion away. Just be aware that you'll be mocked for having one that is subjectively ridiculous to their own. To your own, or their own, whatever. I'm so tired right now, fuck. So, is there any questions that anyone has before we go forward? I'm gonna give it like 5 minutes. I'll make sure to put a timestamp in this as we're going forward. I need to get a drink of water, get something to eat. I'll be right back. Alright, welcome back. So we're going to get a move on with this and move on to our next topic, which is did a Swedish scientist propose cannibalism as a solution to climate change? The simple answer is no. No, he did not. Magnus Soldern, who is both a behavioral scientist and economist, he made this sort of announcement at this meeting at Stockholm's Stockholm School for Economics on September 3rd, 2019. And it says that Magnus did not propose or advocate cannibalism as a solution to climate change during a September 3rd interview on the Swedish television channel TVR4. Rather, that he explained his research into the issue was intended to provoke thought and gauge where audience would draw the line. Wow, you must have such discredited faith in humanity if you think that's how low the line you need to draw for people not to get not to get food. I mean, what are we talking, like third world countries, like Stone Age countries? Like what I'm trying to think of what major first or second world country is dealing with mass famine nowadays. It seems to be like an Ebola or E. coli plague or some shit like that. But it's like, that's the statement, is that he never made this claim, but it's been made despite the fact that there's no footage or copy of his presentation at this point. It's like, that's so stupid. It's like, I mean, I'm glad that this website is taking the initiative to say, like, this is what he said, but not specifically within the case that we can believe him without the prospect of evidence, not entirely at least. Solderlund himself rejects claims he had advocated or proposed cannibalism in his presentation, and he told us he had merely gauged the audience's response to the theoretical prospect of eating human flesh. That still doesn't answer my question how the fuck that has anything to do with climate change. I'm assuming that if shit gets colder, it's colder and warmer much more drastically and like extremely. It's as if it's implying that like human beings won't be like by that time human beings would not have developed genetic engineering or breeding techniques to at least provide livestock with an acclimatized means to provide the resources that people consume. Because I'm assuming that there are conditions these animals need in order to, at the very least, provide a bountiful harvest for their farmers, I guess you could say. In September 2019, we received multiple inquiries about news reports that claimed it's like, I don't know, it's like did he read The Road or something? Like I'm quite curious why he thinks that human beings would just resort to cannibalism instead of, I don't know, some protein alternative like tofu or something. It's like even tofu has more protein than fish and steak, like combined. Like, I don't eat tofu, but from what I've been told, that is the case, or what I've read up on, that is the case. claimed the scientists in Sweden had proposed, advocating, or suggested that people should turn to cannibalism as a way of combating climate change. The Epoch Times published an article with the statement: a Swedish researcher advocates eating human flesh to combat climate change food shortages, which went on to report that climate change alarmism has taken a macabre turn that looks like satire but isn't. It happened in Sweden at a summit for food of the future, the climate-ravaged future called Gastro Summit in Stockholm on September 3rd to 4th. The professor held a PowerPoint presentation asserting we must awaken the idea of eating human flesh in the future as a way of combating the effects of climate change. Which, like I said, it's like, I guess his intention is this statement to spur, I guess, to wake people up. Sure, I can get that. But I think of, like, in sort of more of a fear-mongering case, it could be like, I don't know. I like I said, I personally highly doubt that, like, we like, I'll tell you, like, back in the 80s, we would have probably been on the line of extinction, or I'd say the world population as we know it wouldn't be as large as it is, just for the simple fact of genetically modified produce or crops. I forget what the actual term is called, but a scientist working in Mexico to create crops that can grow in conditions of third world countries to help deal with the starvation problem, and just the fact that the amount of vitamins and nutrients that are in the soil to grow healthy crops, like that, it doesn't need that sort of thing. It can grow in less hospitable, in more hospitable locations. So, like I said before, I don't remember what the exact term is, but had that not been invented, and by the way, he did, the man who invented and the team that tested and did all this, ends up winning the Nobel Peace Prize. I'd say that this, this invention is what saved the human race in terms of an agricultural aspect. I don't know about livestock. I'm sure that, like, without the proper quantity of vegetation, farmers in these third world countries wouldn't be able to raise the cattle, the livestock, to have the meat that they need. So it's, I didn't know that. I didn't know that until, like, I think my sophomore year of college, in my world history class. It's like, again, I just find it highly improbable that we as a species are incapable, or at the very least, we would still resort to cannibalism unless it was some kind of, I don't even think it would be climate change that's responsible for it. It'd have to be some kind of rampant disease or, like, inoculated or human natural disaster. And I'm not talking about, like, the human effects of climate change. I'm talking more of, like, nuclear war or something like that. That would definitely make a lot more sense. I think it just should have left the climate change thing alone, and, like I said, like, focus on, like, where is technology now? Like, how much of the world has this technology? Like, how much of the world is still developing? How much of the world's population are in these developing nations? Do they or do they not have the technology to, grow a sustainable amount of produce, crops, livestock, yada yada yada, and then present the information on, I guess you could say, the rapid decline or the mortality rates that would result due to disease, starvation, aspects like that, crime, such as like murder, stuff like that, kidnappings. Well, that has nothing to do with mortality rates. It's ultimately. I think you guys get the point here. Like, does anyone disagree with what I have to think? I mean, if you're not in the stream right now, like, please feel free to comment with your argument. I'm gonna continue to read on. As a solution to global climate change and limiting standards, whose headline reads, "Scientists suggest eating human meat to tackle climate change." The right-leaning website Breitbart posted an article with the headline, "Swedish scientists propose cannibalism to fight climate change," and Hannity.com, the website of Fox News anchor Sean Hannity, reported that a European scientist speaking at a summit in Sweden last week suggested a controversial new trend, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, like, I'd have to be there. I know that when I went on the Fox News article website, it's like, there was this presentation saying that, like, of the few societies that still practice cannibalism, like this one tribe, there is a rampant disease within the society called the silent laughing. I think it was like the laughing death, or the silent laughing death disease, which is something that you can contract from consuming infected brain matter. Which again, it's like, we're talking about the road, but I mean, like, the road was still ambiguous as to why the world went to shit. I get that in a post-apocalyptic sort of sense, resources would be limited, but at the end of the day, I think if climate change is the biggest thing that we have to deal with in this day and age, then I think we can probably keep pace with it, at the very least. It's like, this is like some kind of bullshit pep talk. It's like, like I said before, it's like, is this to assume that this man's faith in humanity is like that low? I'm like, I wouldn't be surprised in this scenario. Like, let's say it's true that climate change does kill our supply on meat, makes it unlivable or just difficult for them to produce any significant, again, it could be like a disease that, it poisons the meat or something, or it makes it difficult for the cattle to breed for some reason. I don't know. It could even be evolution. I don't know. It's just shit changing over time, but I don't. It's like, of the things on the list that I think of that would put our supply of meat in danger, like, I wouldn't even put climate change on the top 5. Maybe it's me just because I'm American and I live in a society where I can get food, whether it's real or not, as much protein or not. I know natural made products, like untampered cattle meat from, like, for steak or whatever, is somewhat of a rare commodity. But it's like, we change, we evolve as a society, and sometimes we have to make sacrifices, and in that sort of air of sentiment, I can somewhat see where he's coming from. Because there's nothing that we won't do to survive. And when it comes to survival, morality has nothing to do with anything. It's just necessity. Like, you could feel bad about it after the fact, but it's like, And I'm not saying I'm condoning, I'm approving of what he's saying or approving of the concept of cannibalism in general. I'm just saying human history has been built upon atrocities, and it just seemingly comes from a need for resources and domination. There are sheep and shepherds in this world. Figure out which one you are before you step into the real world. That's all I have to say. So, Anthony just gave me this, and I think he told me he covered this somewhat on the last stream. I believe he said he either pulled the pedophile into the stream and Leo was talking to him, or Leo was talking to the guy who was making the accusations. I'm not 100% sure. I was a little bit in and out of it. But, let me see. I can't really say for sure. My guess is how it was. Oh, I really like from these threads. Let me go back to the first page. Gay pedophile sonic genre webcomics. Is this the second coming of Chris Chan or some shit? Honestly, I just want screenshots of this guy doing like weird pedo shit with kids. Some of this shit dates back to June. Oh yeah, that's what Anthony said. It was 2014. Unfortunate. Oh. For anyone worrying, no, this stream is not safe for kids, so I don't really give a fuck if we come across any porn in the process. I think y'all can forgive me for that. Just don't tell YouTube. Huh. I should consider myself lucky that he could have any woman he wants. So you better shape up. Psy came from the... Yeah, you see, here's the thing. It's like... I feel bad for victims or whatever. But I can't really take, like, testimonial written garbage like this on face value. Like... I wish them the best in the world, and I hope they get help, and I hope they find someone better in their life, but I can't just burn someone to the ground with anecdotal texts on a screen. Like, if this is what she's saying, if this is what Psy was saying about this woman, like, God bless her. Oh, like I said before, like, I hope she's moved on from this. It's, like, been 15 fucking years ago. Almost 16. Make a thread about this. Shepu is one of my good friends, and I could verify that everything that happened in the post is true. Okay. I'm still waiting for some screenshots that validates any of this. Oh god, this guy, I remember hearing about this weird It's like, it goes back to like, why I made the Loki video. It's like, he might have done that shit, but it's like, no one can really seem to give me like a straight story answer, and like this evidence could quite have easily been taken out of context, and in some cases the accusations were proven to be like downright false. Because, you know, bandwagoning, appeal to authority, all that shit. This is gonna be quite my most popular stream. I can see it now. Over a decade ago, wow. Oh. I said 2004, not 2014. Shit. That's 6 years ago. God, I'm tired. Yeah, someone did have to. No one wanted it, but definitely someone wanted to. Like, who wanted anthrax? Well, someone had to make anthrax. Doesn't mean that anyone wanted it. I thought Sonic hanging out with his young boyfriend pioneered it. Interview. The woman who made the original post, shit straight up disgusting. Interesting tidbits. He seems to hang out with tons of other pedophiles. Oh wow. A few of them argued over who would get to fuck the woman in the video when she turned 18. He writes a ton of poetry about murdering women, specific women. Wow. I hate this guy already. He only thinks about murdering women. What a sexist. I guess he doesn't think that women don't put up enough of a. I guess he's saying he couldn't put up with a man in a fight if he was trying to murder them. Either because he's just such a fat, weak ass. He's such a fat, weak, fat ass, or he's a bunch of sticks. Just bones made of sticks. His dick is a twig. I don't get why the cycle just repeats itself. It's like, I'd have to assume it, like, certainly at some point someone would just realize, hey, maybe I shouldn't be an asshole. Like, maybe, or at the very least, maybe I shouldn't be a big name who hangs around with other pedophiles like me. Maybe I should be one of those guys that no one would miss if they're gone, or no one would notice if they're gone, sort of thing like that. I guess not. Here's a master post of his social media sites and shit. There's nothing here. Wonderful. Anecdotal bullshit. Let's see. Tarzan and Jane costumes, and there's... Fuck. Oh god, his trash lives in Texas. This trash lives in Texas. I'll personally kick him out of my state. I like this guy. What a great member of society. He's doing a great person as Chisato Ichioka, weeb name, in an anime I've picked up called insert weeb name title here. In the darkness, he is likable as a bag of burning Play-Doh paddle poo. God, what is that horrifying thing? Yeah, I know, I'm asking the same question, man. How famous or well known is this guy? Ever heard of this guy? Honestly, at this point, I don't really give a shit if, like, one of my friends was a pedophile. Like, I know that some people might point to Fusion, but it was like, I mean, I was gonna do a project with him, but we were never really friends. In fact, I don't really have any friends online. Or at the very least, I don't want any friends online. Maybe if we met in real life and had a drink, robbed a bank, you know, some shit like that, bonded and shit, IRL. At least more than one time. And outside of a fucking convention, please. The apology, here we go. Oh. Click. Okay. Hi, Psyguy, I saw your tweet longer. You said a lot of bullshit, so I'm going to respond because I have nothing better to do. This is asinine. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is available, the video we saw on the thread. When she was 16, I would have a very bad breakup, and this would make me extremely depressed. To you when I was... No, I don't... This is asinine. No, it is not. No, I don't admit to sexually abusing you. I said some incredibly nasty stuff to you when I was younger, 24, over the internet. Did you mean you dated me when you were 26, which you did admit to me? I can't see any of this shit. Imgur, here we go, good old Imgur. Tara, I'm not exactly sure where to start. Okay, yeah, this is him. I'm sure that this is the last thing you expected me to see. I'm trying to open up the doors of communication and try to resolve the issue we have between us peacefully. I am sorry, I understand I have inadvertently hurt you a great deal, and I am greatly sorry. I'm sure he is. Sorry you got caught. I disagree with the pedophile claims, but I do understand a lot of emotional damage that has been dealt. I had extremely low self-esteem. I don't know why. Apparently, according to some people, you were somewhat famous. Doesn't surprise me. I mean, you're advocating for attention online. Of course, you'd have low self-esteem. And all I did to try and overcompensate for this was make a lot of really inappropriate jokes and comments, trying to act like some big shot, and I bluntly hurt a lot of people, including yourself. Had known what I did online would affect people to the drastic measure it did, I can assure you it wouldn't have happened. I think it was bullshit. I think you were gambling. I think you were gambling your chances, faggot. Had you known? Okay. It was still extremely bitter about you accepting Stefan's... I'm sorry. I am sorry that it has caused you so much grief and can only offer you an apology. Oh, he's so sorry, guys. I still have no idea what the fuck he did. I just know that he said some inappropriate stuff to a minor. I hate this vague ambiguity. I was still extreme. I don't know how hard it is. I know that some people complain about how I organize Google Docs. But at the very least, I put it in chronological order to set up the story. But then I make sure to prioritize. Yes, there are logs. This is what they did. Here's the undeniable, here's the standards of proof. Here's their age, here's the victim's age, here's the perpetrator's age. Just so they know that they're aware of each other's age. Here's the RPs. Here's any extended links I can find. This is the closest I came to doxing this motherfucker. You know, shit like that. I mean, it sort of saves us the trouble. It's fucking Sonic guy. Like, of course it's fucking Sonic. I was still extremely bitter about you accepting Stefan's proposal when we were together, so I think that colored... What, for, like, marriage proposal? Project proposal? Like, what the... Like, it seems to have something to do with, like, her accepting it. You got cucked, essentially. You like, how old is Stefan? Is he an adult, or is he some kid this girl's age? Like, Tara's age or whatever. I never thought anyone would care for you more than a couple of days about what I said, because that's what it honestly felt like. I would come home alone and try to fill the void. I would try and take on this bigger than life personality online. Well, that's your first mistake, is making an online personality bigger than your real life. Oh my god. Not on purpose. It would just kind of happen. And a lot of people, yourself included, got the brunt of that snobbish nature. I'm sorry you've had to deal with that. I've been dealing with my own demons, and if it's not fair, I made you deal with them as well. It's I think we get the brunt of this point. It's total bullshit. Like, words don't really mean shit to me. I don't think it means anything to anyone else. I'll take care of this later. I'll probably do some more digging tomorrow after the stream is over. If there's any more questions anyone has, please don't hesitate to comment to me. I hope you guys enjoyed the show, and I hope you guys have a good night. Happy New Year. I hope you guys have a great rest of your year, and take care.